Greetings, brave souls, and welcome to the shadowed corridors of Nocturnal Nightmares TV, where the rain doesn't just fall, it listens. Tonight, we're unraveling tales so chilling, even the thunder hesitates to roar. As the storm murmurs secrets, we'll venture into true horrors that squirm in the dark corners of reality. If your spine tingles, pledge your courage. Smash subscribe and let the algorithm know you dare to linger here. Drop a drop of blood in the comments if you're watching from a place the night has already claimed. Your support fuels our descent into the abyss. Now, steady your pulse, lock your screen's glow, and let the whispers of these stories crawl into your ears. The darkness is listening. Are you? The clinking of glasses and forced laughter grated on my nerves. 22 of us, strangers brought together by the insidious promise of love will find you. An app that seemed less about romance and more about morbid curiosity. I was here, I had to admit, out of desperation. Middle age had crept up on me, leaving me feeling like a forgotten book on a dusty shelf. Across the table sat April, my assigned date. She was undeniably beautiful, with eyes the color of melted chocolate and a smile that could launch 1,000 ships, or at least a few lonely hearts like mine. We'd engaged in polite conversation about our jobs, our hobbies, and the absurd premise of this whole charade. I was trying, and I think she was too, but the air hung thick with the scent of awkwardness and cheap wine. The venue was a trendy loft space, dimly lit and adorned with faux industrial chic. The music was a generic, upbeat pop that did little to ease the tension. Everyone was paired up, attempting to navigate the strange dance of first impressions under the watchful and probably judgmental eyes of the other couples. As the evening wore on, a sense of camaraderie, born of shared discomfort, began to emerge. People loosened up, sharing embarrassing stories and self-deprecating jokes. Even April seemed to relax, her laughter becoming more genuine. I started to think maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be a complete disaster. Then, at exactly 11:55 p.m., the world shifted. My phone buzzed, a jarring interruption to April's story about a disastrous attempt at pottery. I glanced down, expecting a spam message or a notification from some forgotten app. Instead, the screen displayed the logo of Love Will Find You. But something was terribly wrong. The cheerful pink had been replaced with a blood red, and the words had morphed. Death will find you, the app now screamed. You have 5 minutes. Then the evil will come. A collective gasp swept through the room as everyone's phones mirrored the same horrifying message. Panic erupted. People jumped to their feet, knocking over chairs and spilling drinks. The music abruptly cut out, replaced by an unnerving silence. Someone, a young man with a nervous demeanor, tried to open the main door. It remained stubbornly shut. He rattled the handle, kicked the frame, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if it had been welded shut. It's locked. We're trapped, he yelled, his voice cracking with fear. The initial shock quickly gave way to primal terror. Accusations flew. Was this a prank? Some kind of sick joke orchestrated by the app developers? Or worse, was it real? I grabbed April's hand, my heart pounding in my chest. Her usually bright eyes were wide with fear, reflecting the flickering candlelight. What's happening? She whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know, I said, trying to sound reassuring. But we need to stay calm. Easier said than done. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. The temperature plummeted. The candlelight flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. One of the women, a petite blonde in a designer dress, started screaming. She pointed towards the far end of the loft, where a long hallway led to the restrooms. There, I see it. It's coming. Most of us couldn't see anything, but her terror was contagious. The screaming intensified, joined by sobs and desperate pleas for help. The 5 minutes were ticking away, each second an eternity. I pulled April closer, positioning myself between her and the hallway. I felt utterly useless, a pathetic shield against whatever was lurking in the shadows. Then it began. A low growl, guttural and inhuman, echoed from the hallway. It was followed by the distinct sound of dragging chains. The shadows deepened, coalescing into a formless mass. The screaming reached a fever pitch. People were clawing at the walls, desperate to escape. The young man who had tried to open the door was now banging on the windows, his face contorted in a mask of pure dread. As the darkness crept closer, I could make out details. Twisted limbs, razor-sharp claws, and eyes that burned with malevolent intelligence. It was a creature from a nightmare, a manifestation of our deepest fears. "It's here," someone whispered, their voice barely audible. The creature lunged, its claws tearing through the air. The petite blonde was the first to fall, her screams abruptly cut short. Chaos reigned. People scrambled, tripped, and were devoured. The air filled with the stench of blood and terror. I tried to shield April, but the creature was too fast, too powerful. I saw it reach for her, its claws extended. I shoved her behind me, bracing for the inevitable. The pain was excruciating. I felt the claws rip through my flesh, tearing at my bones. I screamed, a primal sound of agony and despair. But then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The creature recoiled, hissing in pain. I looked down and saw that April, trembling but unharmed, was holding a small silver pendant. It was an antique, a family heirloom that she had worn around her neck. The creature seemed to be repelled by the pendant. It snarled, its eyes burning with hatred, but it couldn't get close. Realization dawned on me. The pendant, it was protecting us. I grabbed April's hand and pulled her towards the remaining survivors, urging them to huddle together, forming a protective circle around the pendant. The creature circled us, its frustration growing with each passing moment. Couldn't touch us, but it wouldn't leave either. It seemed content to torment us, to revel in our fear. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The screaming had subsided, replaced by whimpers and silent prayers. The air was thick with the smell of death. Then, just as dawn began to break, the creature vanished. The shadows receded, and the temperature returned to normal. The doors unlocked. We were alive, but the loft was a charnel house. Bodies were strewn everywhere, a testament to the horrors we had witnessed. Out of the 22 of us, only a handful had survived. April and I stumbled out of the building, blinking in the morning light. We were covered in blood, traumatized beyond words. The app was gone from our phones. The nightmare was over, but the memory remained, etched into our minds forever. We never spoke of it again, not really. We knew that no one would believe us. We were just a couple of survivors, bound together by a shared experience of unimaginable horror. Love will find you, the app had promised. It was a lie. It was death that had found us, and we were lucky to have escaped with our lives. The crunch of snow under my boots was the only sound for miles. Crystal Mountain lived up to its name. Towering pines dripped with frozen jewels, and the air bit with a clean, sharp cold. I breathed deep, the sting strangely invigorating. This was our tradition. 7 of us and me, Hope, James, Adam, Lisa, Samantha, and Stacy, escaping the city grind for this isolated haven every holiday season. We were college friends, bound by shared memories and the unspoken knowledge that life was easier faced together. The cabin was as welcoming as I remembered, a rustic frame with a roaring fireplace that always seemed to draw us in like moths to a flame. Laughter echoed as we unpacked, stowing away the mundane for a few days of board games, bad movies, and the comforting weight of shared history. The first few days were idyllic. We hiked, skied, and told stories around the fire, our voices blurring into a comfortable hum. But on the third night, something shifted. It started with a whisper of wind, a sound far too loud for the sheltered valley. The trees outside groaned, their branches clawing at the cabin walls. "Sounds like a nasty storm brewing," James commented, glancing nervously at the windows. Hope, always the pragmatist, scoffed. "Just a little wind. Remember last year's blizzard? This is nothing." But it wasn't the wind that unsettled me. It was the feeling, the prickling unease that crept under my skin. I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched, of something unseen lurking just beyond the circle of light. Later that night, unable to sleep, I found myself drawn to the living room. The fire had burned low, casting long, dancing shadows. I was about to add another log when I saw it. A glint of light nestled amongst the dried flowers that adorned the mantelpiece. Curiosity overriding caution, I reached for it. It was small, no bigger than my thumb, and crafted from what looked like polished bone. Intricate carvings covered its surface, depicting figures with elongated limbs and wide, unsettling eyes. Felt cold to the touch, almost unnaturally so. Suddenly, a voice, thin and reedy, filled the room. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "So, you found me." I dropped the carving like a hot coal. The fire flared, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. "Who's there?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. The air shimmered, and a figure began to materialize in the corner of the room. It was small, impossibly so, with skin the color of aged parchment and eyes that glittered like polished obsidian. Delicate wings, like those of a moth, fluttered behind her. "I am what you mortals call a fairy," she said, her voice dripping with ancient malice. "And you have awakened me." Panic seized me. I knew about the old tales, the warnings whispered by the local stories of the mountain fairies, creatures of immense power and unpredictable cruelty. We had always dismissed them as folklore, as tales told to scare children. But here, in my living room, stood proof that they were all too real. I didn't mean to," I stammered. "We didn't know." Her eyes narrowed. "Ignorance is no excuse. You have disturbed my slumber, disrupted the balance. Now you will pay the price." Before I could react, she launched forward, her speed defying her size. I scrambled back, knocking over a table, the sound echoing through the silent cabin. "Hope! James! Wake up!" I screamed, my voice raw with terror. The fairy shrieked, a sound that pierced the air and sent shivers down my spine. She grabbed a fireplace poker, the movement far too fluid and strong for her size, and lunged again. The others tumbled into the living room, bleary-eyed and confused. Their confusion quickly turned to horror as they took in the scene. "What the hell is that?" Adam gasped, his face pale. "A fairy," I managed, my voice shaking. "And she's not happy." The fairy, seeing her prey gathered together, smiled a chilling, predatory grin. "Oh, this is going to be fun." Chaos erupted. The fairy moved with impossible speed, darting between us, striking with the fireplace poker. We were bigger, stronger, but she was faster, more agile, and fueled by an ancient rage. James was the first to fall. He screamed as the fairy slammed the poker into his leg, the bones snapping with a sickening crack. He collapsed, clutching his leg and howling in agony. Hope grabbed a heavy lamp and swung it at the fairy, but she dodged with ease, her movements almost preternatural. The lamp crashed to the floor, shattering into a million pieces. We tried to fight back, but it was like trying to swat a fly with a baseball bat. She was everywhere, striking with ruthless efficiency. Lisa suffered a deep gash on her arm. Samantha was knocked unconscious, and Stacy was screaming hysterically in the corner. I managed to grab a handful of fireplace ashes and throw them in the fairy's face. She recoiled, momentarily blinded, giving us a brief respite. "We have to get out of here," I yelled, grabbing Hope's arm. "Get to the cars." We scrambled out of the cabin, dragging the injured James with us. The fairy followed, her enraged shrieks echoing through the night. The snow crunched beneath our feet as we raced towards the parking area. The wind howled, whipping the snow into a frenzy. The fairy was gaining on us, her tiny feet barely making a sound in the deep snow. Adam managed to reach the closest car and fumble with the keys. But before he could unlock the door, the fairy was upon him. She leaped onto his back, clawing at his face, her tiny hands surprisingly strong. Adam screamed, batting wildly at her, but she clung on like a leech. He stumbled and fell, the fairy still clinging to him. A horrifying crunch echoed through the night before he went still. We didn't stop to help. We knew if we did, we would all die. The remaining 5 of us piled into the car, me behind the wheel. I slammed the accelerator and we lurched forward, the tires spinning in the snow. I gripped the wheel tightly, my knuckles white. The ferry was still chasing us, keeping pace with the car with unnatural speed and fury. I risked a glance in the rearview mirror and saw her face, a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The car screeched across the icy road, the ferry still nipping at our heels. Hope sat beside me, sobbing quietly. James moaned in pain in the back seat, while Lisa and Stacy stared straight ahead, their faces blank with shock. I knew we couldn't outrun her forever. We were trapped, hunted by a creature of ancient malice. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the snow-covered landscape, I made a decision. We were going to fight. We had to, or we were all going to die on Crystal Mountain, victims of a fairy's wrath. We can't keep running, I said, my voice trembling but firm. We have to stop and fight her. The others looked at me as if I were crazy, but they knew I was right. We had no other choice. We armed ourselves with whatever we could find, tire irons, screwdrivers, even a sturdy pine branch. Then we waited. The fairy came. She emerged from the trees, her eyes burning with a malevolent light. She looked at us, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "So, you've decided to stand and fight?" she said, her voice dripping with amusement. How brave, how foolish. The battle was brutal. We were injured, exhausted, and terrified, but we fought with a ferocity born of desperation. We knew that our lives depended on it. I don't know how long the fight lasted. Time seemed to blur, and the only thing I could focus on was surviving. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, we managed to overpower the fairy. Using a combination of brute force and sheer luck, we trapped her beneath a pile of rocks. She screamed and cursed, but we ignored her. We were too tired, too battered, too emotionally drained to care. We left her there, trapped beneath the rocks, and drove away from Crystal Mountain, leaving behind the bodies of our friends and the memory of a nightmare we would never forget. I don't know if the fairy is still there, trapped beneath the rocks. I don't know if she will ever escape, but I do know one thing. I will never set foot on Crystal Mountain again. Some things are best left undisturbed, and some secrets are best left buried, and some legends are all too real. Ooh, knew she is here. The hum of the RV's engine vibrated through my bones, a lullaby against the backdrop of the darkening highway. Lisa, Greg, Miller, Chris, Joan, April, my girlfriend, and I were all packed inside, a motley crew escaping the city for the long weekend. Lakeside was our destination, a shimmering promise of relaxation and camaraderie. I'd finally sprung for a decent RV, a real beast, and this was its maiden voyage with the gang. The air was thick with anticipation. Lisa, ever the organizer, was already planning our hiking routes. Greg, the resident comedian, was regaling us with increasingly absurd jokes. Miller, the quiet observer, was lost in a book, a half-smile playing on his lips. Chris and Joan were locked in a fierce game of cards, their banter punctuated by bursts of laughter. April, nestled beside me, squeezed my hand, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Felt perfect. Then, at precisely 7:10 p.m., the idyllic scene shattered. There was a sickening thud, a jarring impact that sent everyone lurching forward. The RV shuddered violently. My heart leaped into my throat. What the hell was that? Chris barked, dropping his cards. I wrestled the RV to the side of the road, my hands clammy on the steering wheel. I don't know. I think we hit something. Panic started to simmer in the enclosed space. Something? Like what? Lisa asked, her voice trembling slightly. I killed the engine and stepped out into the cool evening air. The headlights illuminated the empty road behind us. Nothing. No sign of an animal, no debris, no other vehicles. Just the endless stretch of asphalt disappearing into the darkness. I don't see anything, I called back, my voice laced with confusion. Greg joined me, his brow furrowed. Maybe it was a pothole? A really big one. We searched the shoulder of the road for a good 20 minutes, but found nothing. The RV looked undamaged. No dents, no scratches. The whole thing was bizarre. Maybe we imagined it, Joan suggested, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. The idea was absurd, yet strangely comforting. We were tired, the light was fading, maybe our minds were playing tricks on us. Reluctantly, we climbed back into the RV. I started the engine, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. "Let's just get to Lakeside," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We can check the RV properly in the morning." The rest of the drive was subdued. The laughter and jokes were gone, replaced by a palpable tension. Everyone seemed to be listening intently, waiting for another inexplicable impact. We arrived at the Lakeside campground late, the moon casting long, eerie shadows across the deserted landscape. We quickly set up camp, the silence amplifying the rustling of leaves and the distant hooting of an owl. Dinner was a hurried affair, eaten in the RV under the dim glow of the interior lights. The plan was to have a bonfire, roast marshmallows, and tell ghost stories. But no one was in the mood. We all retreated to our sleeping bags early, the lingering unease settling into a heavy weight in the pit of my stomach. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying the thud over and over in my mind. What had we hit, and why was there no trace of it? I drifted off to sleep sometime after midnight, only to be plagued by restless dreams. Then it started, a faint scratching at first, like fingernails dragging across the metal exterior of the RV. I dismissed it as branches scraping against the side, but it continued, growing louder, more insistent. I nudged April awake. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. She groaned and rolled over. "Hear what? Go to sleep." The scratching intensified, turning into a rhythmic scraping, accompanied by a low, guttural moan. It was coming from beneath the RV. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my sleep-addled brain. This wasn't branches. This wasn't the wind. This was something else entirely. I sat up, my heart pounding against my ribs. "Guys," I said, my voice trembling. "Wake up. I think there's something outside." Slowly, groggily, the others stirred. The moaning and scraping continued, growing louder, more desperate. Greg, ever the pragmatist, grabbed a flashlight. "Probably just a raccoon," he mumbled, trying to sound reassuring. He flicked on the flashlight and cautiously opened the door of the RV. The beam of light swept across the campground, illuminating trees, picnic tables, and something else, something huddled beneath the RV. It was human-shaped, but twisted and broken. Its limbs were contorted at unnatural angles, its clothes torn and bloodied. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could hear its ragged breathing, its desperate moans. Greg stumbled back, his face white. "Jesus Christ," he gasped. "What the hell is that?" The figure beneath the RV began to crawl, dragging itself slowly towards us. As it moved into the light, I saw its face, or what was left of it. One eye was missing, the socket a gaping hole. Its nose was crushed, its jaw hanging loosely. Its skin was pale and mottled, covered in cuts and bruises. It was a grotesque parody of a human being. And then it spoke. Its voice was a raspy whisper, barely audible above the pounding of my heart. "You hit me." Recognition slammed into me like a physical blow. The thud on the road, the missing evidence, the nagging feeling of unease. We had hit this thing, and we had left it for dead. The figure continued to crawl, its broken limbs propelling it forward with agonizing slowness. Its remaining I locked onto mine, filled with an unbearable mix of pain and accusation. "You left me," it rasped. "Now, I won't let you leave." Terror seized me. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The others were screaming, their faces contorted with fear. The scraping and moaning intensified, accompanied by a frantic pounding on the door. The RV rocked violently, as if something was trying to tear it apart. We were trapped inside a metal box with a creature that we had wronged, a creature that was now seeking its revenge. The relaxing weekend at Lakeside had turned into a nightmare. We were no longer campers, enjoying the peace of nature. We were the victims, and there was no escape. The old brick of Crestwood High loomed against the perpetually overcast sky, a monument to forgotten promises and stale chalk dust. I'd been teaching English here for 15 years, long enough to know its quirks, its comforting creaks, and its deep, unsettling secrets. The biggest secret, of course, was the basement. The basement was sealed off before I even arrived. A heavy steel door, bolted shut and reinforced with thick chains, stood at the end of a dimly lit corridor, a stark contrast to the otherwise maintained building. Officially, it was deemed structurally unsound, a safety hazard. Unofficially, the whispers started on day one. The old principal, the students would mutter, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. He's still down there, punishing the bad kids. I, a rational, educated adult, dismissed it as childish folklore. Just another urban legend to spice up the monotony of high school life. But the whispers persisted, fueled by the hushed tones of veteran teachers and the knowing glances exchanged in the staff room. The legend was always the same. Old Principal Hemlock, a man of strict discipline and archaic methods, ruled Crestwood with an iron fist. Detention was his favorite pastime, and the basement his personal domain. Stories circulated of students being locked down there for days, subjected to, well, no one ever specified what, but the implication was always enough to send shivers down spines. Then, one day, Hemlock disappeared. A brief article in the local paper mentioned his retirement, but the rumors told a different story. A student pushed too far, a dark secret uncovered, a descent into madness. The basement was sealed shortly after. For years, I managed to ignore it, teach my classes, grade my papers, and pretend the heavy steel door didn't exist. But something changed last night. I often stay late, grading papers and preparing lesson plans in the quiet solitude of my classroom. Last night, the solitude was shattered. It started subtly, a faint draft, colder than the autumn air warranted, snaking around my ankles. Then, a scratching sound, like nails on old wood, from somewhere below. I dismissed it as the building settling, old pipes groaning. But then I heard it. A bell. A clear, sharp, insistent school bell. The kind they used to use to signal the end of class. Its metallic clang echoing through the empty halls. Couldn't be. The bell system had been automated years ago. And the sound, it came unmistakably from the basement. My heart hammered against my ribs. I told myself it was a prank. Some kids sneaking in trying to scare the old teacher. But the thought felt flimsy, inadequate, because as the bell faded, I heard something else. A muffled voice, barely audible, but undeniably there. A voice filled with a chilling, righteous anger. "Detention!" It roared, the sound thick with age and venom. "You will all serve detention." I froze, every muscle in my body tense. I wanted to run, to flee the building and never look back. But curiosity, that insidious beast, held me captive. I had to know. Slowly, cautiously, I made my way down the hall, the only sound my own ragged breathing. The air grew colder with each step, the faint scent of mildew and dust growing stronger. I reached the steel door, its rusted surface cold to the touch. The chains that secured it were thick and heavy, the padlock massive. I ran my fingers along the cold metal, feeling the weight of the years, the weight of the secrets it held. And then I saw them, lying on the floor in front of the door, scattered like fallen leaves, were detention slips. Dozens of them, old, brittle, yellowed with age, and they were all filled out, each one bearing the same chilling message. Detention for insubordination, detention for defiance, detention for disrespect. But it wasn't the words that made my blood run cold. It was the ink. The ink wasn't black or blue. It was a viscous, coagulated crimson. Blood. Panic seized me. I stumbled back, knocking over a stack of textbooks. The clatter echoed through the silent hallway, a deafening intrusion. I had to get out of here. I fled back to my classroom, my mind reeling. I slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. I needed to call someone. The police? The principal? But what could I say? I heard a bell in the basement and found bloody detention slips? They'd think I was insane. I sank into my chair, my gaze fixed on my desk, and that's when I saw it. Covering its surface, arranged in neat, unsettling rows, were more detention slips. Hundreds of them, thousands maybe. They overflowed onto the floor, a crimson tide encroaching on my sanctuary. My name was on every single one. Detention for doubting, detention for ignoring, detention for failing to believe. The blood was fresh, still wet. The ink seemed to writhe, the letters shifting and reforming, spelling out my doom. I looked up, and there, standing in the doorway, was him, old Principal Hemlock. He was gaunt and pale, his eyes burning with an unholy fire. His ancient tweed suit hung loosely on his frame, and his tie was askew. But it was his hand that drew my attention. He was holding a bell, the same bell that had rung in the basement. "You didn't believe," he rasped, his voice a dry, rattling whisper. "You doubted my authority. You ignored the rules. Now you will pay the price." He took a step closer, the bell clanging softly in his hand. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to speak, to plead for mercy, but no words came out. "Detention, Mr. Davis," he said, his eyes locked on mine. "Forever." He raised the bell, the sound echoing through the room, louder and sharper than before. And then, everything went black. I don't know how long I was out. When I came to, I was in the basement. The air was thick with the stench of mildew and decay. The only light came from a single flickering bulb hanging precariously from the ceiling. I was sitting at a desk, an old, scarred wooden thing, just like the ones we used in elementary school. In front of me was a stack of detention slips. A pen lay beside them, dripping with fresh blood. I looked around. There were other desks, rows and rows of them, filled with students. Their faces were blank, their eyes vacant. They were all writing. I picked up a slip. The words swam before my eyes. Detention for... I knew what I had to do. I picked up the pen and started to write. The legend of Crestwood High's basement is no longer a legend. It's a reality, and I, Mr. Davis, am now part of it. The new principal. They say the bell still rings sometimes, and if you listen closely, you can hear the muffled voice, a chilling, righteous anger echoing through the halls. "Detention," it roars. "You will all serve detention. Forever." And down in the basement, the sound of scratching pens fills the air, the endless, monotonous symphony of eternal punishment. The cycle continues, the secrets buried deep, and Crestwood High remains a monument to forgotten promises and the price of disbelief. The attic air hung thick and heavy, laden with the scent of dust and forgotten things. Sunbeams, fractured by the grimy window panes, illuminated motes dancing in the air like restless spirits. I coughed, waving a hand in front of my face as I navigated through stacks of discarded furniture and cobweb-draped boxes. My buddies, Mark and Sarah, were somewhere behind me, equally enthralled and disgusted by the contents of this forgotten corner of my recently inherited Victorian home. "Anything interesting, Liam?" Mark's voice echoed from behind a towering stack of moth-eaten velvet curtains. "Just the usual junk," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. But truth be told, a shiver of anticipation ran down my spine. I was hoping, praying almost, to find something of significance, something that would connect me to the family I barely knew. I was adopted, you see, and this house was the only link to my biological past. Then I saw it, tucked away in a shadowed corner, beneath a pile of yellowed newspapers, was a book. It wasn't particularly large or ornate, but it exuded an aura of age, of something ancient and powerful. I carefully pulled it free, blowing away a layer of dust so thick it resembled felt. The cover was plain, dark leather, almost black with age. Embossed in faded gold lettering, barely visible in the dim light, were the words, "Hour for the Witch." A thrill, both exciting and unnerving, shot through me. "Guys, I think I found something," I called out, my voice a little shaky. Mark and Sarah materialized beside me, their eyes widening as I showed them my discovery. Mark, ever the pragmatist, scoffed. "Probably just some old wives' tale," he said. but even he sounded intrigued. Sarah, a history enthusiast and a firm believer in the unexplained, was more enthusiastic. "Let's see inside," she urged, reaching for the book. I hesitated. There was something about the book that made me uneasy, a feeling of impending doom that I couldn't quite shake off. But curiosity, that insatiable human trait, won out. I opened the book. The pages were brittle and yellowed, filled with spidery handwriting in a language I didn't recognize. Strange symbols and unsettling illustrations were scattered throughout the text. Most of it was indecipherable, but in a few places, passages were written in archaic English. We spent the next few hours poring over the book, trying to decipher its secrets. As the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the room, we stumbled upon a passage that sent a chill down my spine. "When the moon bleeds crimson and the veil thins, the hour for the witch arrives. Speak the incantation, offer the sacrifice, and she shall rise." The next page contained the incantation, written in a language that seemed to vibrate with an unnatural energy. Beneath it was a disturbing illustration of a woman, her face contorted in a grotesque mask of hate, surrounded by writhing shadows. "Creepy?" Mark said, trying to laugh it off, but I could see the unease in his eyes. "Maybe we should just put this back," I suggested, my voice barely a whisper. Sarah, however, was captivated. "Wait, look at this," she said, pointing to a footnote written in smaller script. "It says that at the hour for the witch, the barrier between worlds weakens, and beings from beyond can cross over." We closed the book, the unsettling words echoing in our minds. We decided to leave it in the attic, dismissing it as nothing more than a morbid curiosity. But deep down, I knew we had opened a door that should have remained closed. That night, I had a nightmare. I dreamt of the woman in the illustration, her eyes burning with malevolent intent. She was calling my name, her voice a raspy whisper that seemed to claw its way into my soul. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The next day, the strange occurrences began. Objects moved on their own, whispers echoed in empty rooms, and a chilling presence filled the house. We tried to rationalize it, blaming it on old houses and our overactive imaginations. But the feeling of dread persisted, growing stronger with each passing hour. Then the moon turned blood red. It was the night of the lunar eclipse, and as the moon bled crimson across the sky, the air grew heavy with an unnatural stillness. The shadows in the house deepened, twisting into grotesque shapes. We huddled together in the living room, our faces pale with fear. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted. A gust of icy wind swept through the room, extinguishing the flickering candles. We were plunged into darkness. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Then we heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from the hallway. It was followed by the sound of scraping claws on the wooden floor. "It's here," I whispered, my voice choked with terror. We grabbed whatever we could find, a heavy candlestick, a fireplace poker, and braced ourselves for whatever was about to emerge from the darkness. The growling grew louder, closer. A pair of luminous eyes appeared in the hallway, burning with an unholy light. Then, slowly, the creature emerged. It was vaguely humanoid, but twisted and deformed. Its skin was pale and translucent, stretched taut over its skeletal frame. Its eyes were empty sockets filled with a malevolent, swirling energy. And its mouth was a gaping maw filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. The creature lunged. We fought back with everything we had. Mark swung the fireplace poker, connecting with a sickening crunch. The creature recoiled, hissing in pain, but it quickly recovered. Sarah hurled the candlestick, hitting it squarely in the face. But it barely seemed to notice. I knew we were outmatched. This wasn't just some ghost or poltergeist. This was something far more ancient, far more powerful. It was the witch, summoned from the depths of the unknown. Then I remembered the book. "The incantation," I yelled, my voice hoarse with fear. "We need to reverse the incantation." We scrambled back to the attic, the creature hot on our heels. It moved with unnatural speed, its claws scraping against the walls. We barely made it to the attic door before it slammed into us. I fumbled for the book, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I found the page with the incantation and began to read aloud, stumbling over the unfamiliar words. The creature shrieked, a piercing sound that shattered the windows. Clawed at the book, trying to tear it from my hands. But I held on tight, reciting the words as fast as I could. As I reached the final verse, a blinding light filled the room. The creature screamed, its form flickering and distorting. Then, with a final, agonizing shriek, it vanished. The light faded. Silence descended upon the house, broken only by our ragged breathing. We survived, but the experience had changed us. We knew that the world was not as safe as we thought it was. We had glimpsed the darkness that lurked beneath the surface, the ancient evils that waited for their chance to break free. We burned the book that night, watching as the flames consumed its pages. We scattered the ashes to the wind, hoping to erase the memory of what we had done. But I know, deep down, that we can never truly escape the hour for the witch. The memory of that night will forever haunt us, a chilling reminder of the evil we unleashed and the price we paid for our curiosity. And every time the moon turns blood red, I can't help but wonder if the barrier between worlds will weaken once more, and the witch will return. The dust motes danced in the weak beam of my flashlight, a macabre ballet in the sanctum of my obsession. I loved my voodoo doll collection, truly, each one a tiny, stitched effigy of pain, a vessel of malice captured and contained. Or so I'd always believed. My fascination started innocently enough. A chipped, porcelain-faced doll I found in a New Orleans antique shop. The proprietor, a woman with eyes as deep and knowing as the Mississippi River, swore it was blessed. I knew better. I felt the hum of something dark clinging to it, a whisper of forgotten resentments. I bought it instantly. Over the years, the collection grew. I scoured estate sales, haunted flea markets, and even braved the back alleys of Port-au-Prince, each acquisition adding a new layer of unease to my already unusual hobby. There was Marie, with her buttons for eyes and a single, tarnished silver pin stuck through her heart. Then came Bartholomew, a grotesque burlap figure perpetually leering with his stitched grin, and Agnes, smelling faintly of brine and possessing unsettling seaweed-like hair. Each doll had its own story, its own silent scream. I kept them locked away in the attic, a space I rarely visited. The air up there was thick with the scent of decay and dried herbs, a testament to the potent magic, real or imagined, that permeated the collection. I took pride in my self-control, in my ability to handle these potentially volatile objects without succumbing to their influence. I admired them, cataloged them, felt a strange sense of authority over them. Last night, however, something changed. I woke with a start, a sharp, stinging pain lancing through my left shoulder. I sat bolt upright in bed, heart hammering against my ribs. The pain subsided as quickly as it came, leaving behind a lingering ache and a prickling unease. I dismissed it as a muscle cramp, the result of sleeping awkwardly. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Against my better judgment, I found myself drawn to the attic. The rickety wooden stairs creaked under my weight, each step amplifying the gnawing anxiety in my gut. As I reached the top, the heavy door seemed to exhale a gust of stale, musty air, laden with a strange, almost floral scent. The scene that greeted me was anything but ordinary. The dolls, usually arranged haphazardly on the shelves, were gone. In their place, a perfect circle occupied the center of the room. My dolls, each and every one of them, were standing upright, facing inward, their vacant eyes fixed on a single point in the middle of the circle. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't possible. I hadn't touched them in weeks. Had someone broken in? But who would break into an attic just to play with voodoo dolls? The thought was absurd. As I cautiously stepped into the room, the air seemed to grow colder, the silence more profound. The flashlight beam danced across their faces, illuminating the grotesque details of their handcrafted forms. Marie's button eyes seemed to glint maliciously. Bartholomew's stitched grin widened impossibly. Agnes's seaweed hair swayed in a non-existent breeze. I circled the arrangement, my blood turning to ice. Each doll held a small, crude object in its stitched hand. A rusty nail, a shard of glass, a dried bird's foot, a twisted piece of wire. Tokens of suffering, each radiating a palpable aura of darkness. Then I saw it. In the very center of the circle, resting on a bed of dried rose petals, sat a new doll. Smaller than the others, crafted from what looked like old, faded linen. His face was unsettlingly familiar. I knelt down, heart pounding in my chest. As I focused, I realized with a jolt of pure, unadulterated horror that the doll's face was mine. The resemblance wasn't perfect, of course. The doll was crudely made, its features stitched on with thick, uneven thread. But the shape of the eyes, the curve of the nose, the set of the jaw, it was undeniably me. My breath hitched in my throat. This was beyond coincidence, beyond anything I could possibly explain. This was wrong. And then I saw the noose. Tied around the doll's neck was a tiny, perfectly formed noose, crafted from what looked like human hair. It hung limp, but its symbolism was unmistakable. Panic clawed at my throat, choking me. I scrambled backward, away from the circle, away from the miniature me. As I did, I felt another sharp pain, this time in my neck. I instinctively reached up and touched the spot. My fingers came away damp, stained with blood. I gasped, stumbling back against the wall. The dolls seemed to lean forward, their stitched faces contorted into expressions of silent glee. The room began to spin. The pains intensified, now spreading across my body. A sharp sting in my arm, a burning sensation in my leg, a dull ache in my chest. Each pain corresponded to a pin, a nail, a shard of glass held by the surrounding dolls. I realized with sickening clarity what was happening. They weren't just dolls. They were conduits, vessels of pain, and I was the target. I had brought them here, collected them, nurtured them. And now my fascination had turned into my damnation. I had to destroy them. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged forward, kicking over the nearest doll, Bartholomew. The burlap figure landed with a soft thud, his stitched grin mocking me. I grabbed him, intending to rip him apart, but as my fingers grasped the coarse fabric, another wave of pain washed over me, this time a searing agony in my hand. I cried out, dropping the doll as if it were red hot. The pain was unbearable. I looked down at my hand and saw a thin, red line appearing across my palm, mirroring the twisted wire held by another doll. I understood now. I couldn't touch them. Their power was absolute, their connection to me undeniable. My only hope was to escape. I stumbled back toward the door, my body racked with pain. The dolls seemed to sway in unison, their stitched eyes following my every move. As I reached the doorway, I glanced back one last time. The doll in the center of the circle, the one with my face, was swaying gently. I could almost swear its stitched lips were moving, whispering a single word. Soon. I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. I fled down the stairs, not daring to look back. Now I sit here, writing this, my body screaming in agony. Each movement brings a fresh wave of pain. I can feel the noose tightening around my neck, the pressure building with each passing moment. I don't know how much time I have left. I don't know if there's any way to break the connection, to escape the curse I brought upon myself. All I know is that my collection, my beautiful, cursed collection, is finally having its revenge. And the worst part, I can feel myself becoming one of them. The ping on my phone was a blessed sound, a temporary reprieve from the gnawing emptiness of my bank account. Uber Eats delivery, 14 Maple Street. Okay, Maple Street. I didn't recognize the address offhand, but navigation could handle it. Maybe tonight I could actually afford a decent burger instead of ramen. Maple Street wasn't in my usual zone. It was on the edge of town, where the houses were older, bigger, and shrouded in an unsettling quiet. As I pulled up to number 14, a chill snaked down my spine despite the humid summer air. The house was a Victorian monstrosity, paint peeling like sunburnt skin, windows dark and vacant. It looked abandoned, the kind of place urban explorers dared each other to enter. I double-checked the address, 14 Maple Street. The app confirmed it, but something felt wrong, deeply wrong. The house seemed to exhale an aura of decay and neglect, a silent scream trapped within its aged walls. Hesitantly, I walked up the overgrown path, crunching dried leaves underfoot. The doorbell was missing, leaving behind a rusty, gaping hole. I knocked, the sound echoing eerily in the stillness. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Just as I was about to call the customer, my phone buzzed. A text message. "Leave it in the attic." The message was from the name associated with the order, Silas Blackwood. The attic? I peered up at the roofline. There was a small, square opening, presumably the attic hatch, but it was high up, almost impossible to reach without a ladder. More unsettlingly, it looked like it had been nailed shut, thick planks of wood hammered across the opening. I texted back, "The attic hatch is nailed shut. Where should I leave the food?" No response. I tried calling, but the call went straight to voicemail. A generic, robotic voice announced the number was unavailable. This was getting weird. Annoyed, but also a little creeped out, I circled the house, looking for an alternative entrance. The back door was warped and swollen, but surprisingly, it wasn't locked. I hesitated. Trespassing was a bad idea, even for Uber Eats. But the customer wasn't responding, and I wasn't about to drive back with a bag full of someone else's pad thai. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The air inside was thick with dust and the smell of mildew, like a forgotten tomb. The interior was even more dilapidated than the exterior. Cobwebs draped over everything. Furniture was draped in white sheets like ghostly figures, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding hollow in the vast space. "Silas? Uber Eats." Silence. Against my better judgment, I ventured further inside. The house was a labyrinth of hallways and rooms, each one more unsettling than the last. I found myself drawn to a narrow staircase leading upwards, no doubt to the attic. As I reached the top of the stairs, I could see the attic hatch in the ceiling. It was definitely nailed shut, but then I heard it, a faint scratching sound, coming from behind the wooden planks. Scratch, scratch, scratch. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It was methodical, deliberate, like someone or something was trying to claw its way out. I scrambled back down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. This was way beyond a difficult delivery. This was wrong. I fled the house, stumbling over the uneven ground, my only thought to get as far away from 14 Maple Street as possible. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, slamming the door shut and locking it with trembling hands. As I drove away, I glanced back at the house. It stood silent and menacing in the twilight, a dark stain on the landscape. I noticed something glinting on the porch, where I had left the food. An object reflected the dim light. It was a ring. I didn't remember seeing it there before. Back home, shaken and unnerved, I checked my Uber Eats account. The delivery was marked as completed, and a tip had been added, $50. I almost felt relieved until I saw the image associated with the tip. A gold ring intricately carved with what looked like bones. The same ring I had seen on the porch. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? I delivered food to a haunted house, and now a ghost is tipping me? They'd think I was crazy. Then I noticed something else. My stomach rumbled, reminding me that I hadn't eaten all day. I decided to treat myself, using the generous tip to order that burger I had been craving. The minutes ticked by. The restaurant confirmed the order, and I tracked the driver as he got closer and closer to my apartment. Finally, a notification popped up. "Your order has arrived." Relief washed over me as I opened my door. But it wasn't the Uber Eats driver standing there. It was nothing, just an empty hallway. But on the floor, right in front of my door, sat a single, glistening burger in a greasy paper bag. Hesitantly, I bent down to pick it up. As I did, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck and heard a raspy whisper, so close it tickled my ear. "Thank you." I spun around, but there was no one there. Panic clenched my chest. I slammed the door shut, locking it tight. I didn't eat the burger. I spent the next few days in a state of constant paranoia, jumping at every creak and shadow. I couldn't sleep, haunted by the image of that decaying house and the feeling of that cold breath on my neck. I tried to rationalize it. Stress, exhaustion, and overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. Then the hunger started. Not the normal kind of hunger. This was a gnawing, insatiable emptiness. A desperate craving that went beyond mere physical need. I ate everything in my apartment, but the hunger only intensified. One night, I woke up in a cold sweat, my stomach twisting in agony. I staggered to the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, gaunt and pale, with dark circles under my eyes. But it was my teeth that truly horrified me. They seemed sharper, more pointed than I remembered. The hunger roared within me, a primal scream demanding to be fed. I felt a strange compulsion, a magnetic pull towards Maple Street. I knew what was happening. The ring. It was a cursed object, a conduit for something ancient and malevolent. Silas Blackwood hadn't just been ordering food. He had been searching for a vessel, a way to escape the confines of that decaying house. And I, the unwitting Uber Eats driver, had delivered myself right into his grasp. Driven by an insatiable hunger, I found myself walking down Maple Street. The Victorian house loomed before me, its dark windows like vacant eyes. The front door swung slowly open, beckoning me inside. As I stepped across the threshold, I knew I wasn't just delivering food anymore. I was the food, and Silas Blackwood was waiting. The chipped paint of our shared apartment ceiling was the first thing I saw every morning, and lately, it was the source of a gnawing dread. It wasn't the paint itself, but what happened beneath it, or rather, what was happening to me beneath it. It all started subtly with Sarah's peculiar sleep talking. Sarah, my roommate of almost a year, had always been a bit of an oddball. A vegan taxidermist, yes, you read that right, with a penchant for wearing Victorian lace and a disconcerting collection of antique dolls. I'd always dismissed her eccentricities as harmless quirks, the price I paid for affordable rent in a decent neighborhood. But the sleep talking evolved. It wasn't just mumbling anymore. It was chanting. At first, it was low and rhythmic, a barely audible drone that I could almost ignore. But then the volume increased, the chants taking on a guttural, almost foreign quality. I'd lie in bed, listening to the strange cadence emanating from her room, a shiver crawling down my spine. I started using earplugs, but even then, the vibrations seemed to seep through the walls, resonating in my very bones. Last week changed everything. It was 3 a.m, and a blood-curdling scream ripped me from a fitful sleep. I bolted upright, heart hammering against my ribs, and rushed to Sarah's room. The door was slightly ajar, and the sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. Sarah was standing beside my bed, her back to me. The chanting, louder than ever, filled the room. As I took a hesitant step closer, she slowly turned. Her eyes were rolled back, vacant and white. Her face was contorted in a strange, grotesque expression. "Sarah," I whispered, my voice trembling. She didn't react. The chanting continued, a relentless, hypnotic drone. Then, her lips peeled back in a ghastly smile, revealing teeth that seemed sharper, longer than I remembered. "The ritual needs 2, she hissed, the words raspy and alien, completely unlike her usual voice. I stumbled back, knocking over a stack of books on my nightstand. Fear, raw and primal, flooded my senses. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen in place, paralyzed by the sheer horror of the moment. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Sarah's eyes snapped back into focus, her body slumped, and she swayed unsteadily. What happened?" she mumbled, her voice thick with confusion. I had a bad dream." I stared at her, speechless, my mind reeling. A bad dream? This was more than a bad dream. This was something else. I managed to stammer out a response. telling her she had been sleepwalking and talking in her sleep. I left out the part about the eyes, the hissing, and the terrifying claim about needing to. I didn't want to think about it, let alone talk about it. But I couldn't ignore it. The next night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside my window, sent jolts of terror through me. I lay awake, listening, waiting for the chanting to begin again. It did. This time, it was different. The chanting started softer, more insidious, like a whisper caressing my ears. It seemed to emanate not just from Sarah's room, but from the very walls of the apartment. And then the most horrifying thing happened. The chanting began to sound familiar. I realized, with a sickening lurch, that the voice was changing. It was blending with my own. The guttural syllables twisted and morphed, becoming something that was both Sarah's and mine. I clamped my hands over my ears, desperate to block it out, but it was no use. The chanting was inside my head, echoing in my skull. And then, my bed began to shake. At first, it was a subtle tremor, a slight vibration that I could almost dismiss as my imagination. But then it intensified, the bed rocking violently, as if in the grip of an unseen force. I clung to the mattress, my knuckles white, as the bed began to rise. I screamed, a desperate, strangled cry that was swallowed by the chanting. The bed lifted higher and higher, until I was hovering a foot above the floor, suspended in midair. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to stop, praying for it to be a nightmare. But it was real. I could feel the cold air beneath me, the pull of the unseen force. And I could hear the chanting, now a deafening roar, a horrifying symphony of Sarah's voice and mine. I opened my eyes, and as I did, I saw Sarah standing in my doorway, her eyes rolled back, her face contorted, her lips moving in perfect sync with the chanting. But this time, she wasn't just chanting. She was singing. The words were alien, incomprehensible, yet somehow I understood them. They were words of power, words of invocation, words that were binding me to something. Days turned into weeks, and the nightly rituals continued. The levitation became commonplace. The chanting, a constant companion. I tried to fight it, to resist, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. The force was too strong, too ancient. I tried talking to Sarah, but she remembered nothing of the night's events. She was confused and concerned by my increasingly erratic behavior, my haunted eyes, my desperate pleas for her to stop. "I don't know what you're talking about," she'd say, her brow furrowed with worry. "Are you feeling okay? Maybe you should see a doctor." A doctor? What could a doctor do? This wasn't a medical problem. This was something else, something supernatural. The chanting has become more and more a part of me. I can feel the power building inside me, waiting to be unleashed. It is the voice of someone not from this world. Last night, I dreamt that I had grown taller, my teeth sharper, and I could see in the dark. The ritual needs too. I now understand what that meant. The barrier between worlds is thin, and Sarah and I, we are the gateway. She doesn't know what she is doing, but tonight she will. Tonight, the ritual is complete. Tonight, the gateway opens. I write this now as my bed starts to shake. Sarah sleepwalks into my room. Her eyes now glow like hot coal. I join her. The chanting begins, not just from her, not just from me, but from both of us together, a perfect, terrifying harmony. The room temperature drops. The air crackles with energy. Shadows dance on the walls. The levitation starts. Not just my bed. The entire room is rising. Cracks appear in the walls, spreading like spiderwebs. The air grows thick and heavy, filled with the stench of sulfur and something else, something ancient and indescribably foul. Sarah reaches for my hand. Her grip is icy cold, unnaturally strong. I take her hand, and it begins. The sign was peeling. The paint faded to a sickly pastel, but it still declared, in a font that screamed early internet, the world's largest jackalope. I'd been driving for 12 hours straight, the desert landscape blurring into an endless tapestry of beige and brown. A jackalope, even a grotesquely oversized one. sounded like a welcome distraction. Pulling into the gravel lot, I felt a familiar pang of regret. Roadside attractions were almost always disappointing, preying on the weary traveler's desperation for something, anything, to break the monotony. But I was already out of the car, stretching my stiff limbs. The jackalope was exactly as advertised. Enormous, fiberglass, and thoroughly ridiculous. It stood on its hind legs, its perpetually surprised expression frozen in time, antlers jutting from its head with unsettling realism. I took a few photos, the setting sun casting long, distorted shadows across the parking lot. The gift shop was even more depressing than the jackalope. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight piercing the gloom. Shelves overflowed with cheap plastic trinkets, keychains, postcards, and t-shirts emblazoned with the jackalope's image. An elderly woman with eyes as faded as the sign sat behind the counter, knitting something that looked vaguely like a dish rag. "Finned in everything all right?" she croaked, her voice raspy with disuse. I managed to smile. Just browsing. That's when I saw them. Small glass vials, each filled with a viscous liquid and topped with a cork. A hand-lettered sign above them proclaimed, "Vials of luck, guaranteed to bring good fortune." I scoffed inwardly. Still, curiosity got the better of me. I picked one up, holding it to the light. The liquid inside was a murky green, and floating within it was something. "What's in these?" I asked, wrinkling my nose. The woman cackled, a dry, rustling sound. "The secrets of the desert, darlin'. Each one's unique, brings a different kind of luck." I chose one at random and paid for it, telling myself it was just a souvenir, a quirky reminder of this godforsaken place. Back in the car, I examined the vial more closely. The something was definitely alive. It was a maggot, fat and white, wriggling sluggishly in the green liquid. Disgusted, I almost threw the vial out the window, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the sheer absurdity of the situation, or maybe it was the nagging feeling that I shouldn't dismiss it so easily. I recorked the vial and tucked it into my glove compartment. The drive home was uneventful. I arrived late, exhausted, and promptly forgot about the jackalope and its unsettling gift shop. It wasn't until a week later, when I was clearing out my car, that I rediscovered the vial of luck. I held it up to the light again. The maggot was still alive, still wriggling. I felt a renewed surge of revulsion. This time, I was determined to get rid of it. I went out to my backyard, intending to bury the vial somewhere deep in the flower beds. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. Two figures stood at the edge of the woods bordering my property, silhouetted against the moonlit sky. They were tall, unnaturally so, and their outlines were oddly distorted. As I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, they moved, they hopped, jackalopes. But these weren't the cute, cartoonish jackalopes of tourist traps. These were something else entirely. Their bodies were gaunt and wiry, their fur matted and patchy. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural yellow light, and their antlers weren't bone. They were something far more disturbing. They were made of human bone, bleached white and intricately carved. I stumbled backward, dropping the vial. It shattered on the patio, the green liquid splattering across the flagstones. The maggot, freed from its confinement, wriggled frantically across the ground. The jackalopes didn't react to the sound of the breaking glass. Their attention was fixed on me. They began to move forward, their gait a strange combination of hopping and loping. I scrambled back inside, slamming the door and locking it. I peered through the peephole, my heart hammering in my chest. The jackalopes were at the edge of my lawn, their glowing eyes fixed on my house. For the next few days, they didn't leave. They stayed at the edge of the woods, watching. I tried to ignore them, to convince myself that I was imagining things, that it was all just a bad dream. But I knew it wasn't. Strange things started happening. Objects moved on their own. I heard scratching at the windows in the middle of the night. And then the dreams started. Vivid, horrifying dreams filled with images of bone and blood and the chilling sound of laughter. I tried to research jackalopes, but all I found were myths and legends, tall tales and tourist souvenirs. There was nothing about bone antlers or glowing eyes. I was on my own. Desperate, I drove back to the roadside attraction. The sign was even more faded than I remembered. The jackalope looked even more ridiculous, and the elderly woman was still behind the counter, still knitting. "I need your help," I said, my voice trembling. "The vials of luck. What are they really?" The woman looked up, her faded eyes glinting with something akin to amusement. "Didn't I tell you, darling? The secrets of the desert. Each one brings a different kind of luck." "But the jackalopes," I stammered. "They're not normal. They're antlers." She chuckled a dry, rasping sound. "You got the maggot vial, didn't you? Bad luck, that one. Brings the hunger. The jackalopes, they're drawn to it. They want what you have." "What do they want?" pleaded. "Life," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They want to live, and they'll take it from anyone they can." I drove home in a daze, the woman's words echoing in my ears. I knew what I had to do. I had to get rid of the hunger. I gathered all the remnants of the broken vial, the shards of glass, the splatters of green liquid, even the now-dead maggot. I put them in a metal container and drove out to the desert, far away from my house, far away from the jackalopes. I dug a deep hole, buried the container, and set it on fire. As the flames licked at the night sky, I felt a strange sense of relief. The hunger was gone, or so I hoped. When I returned home, the jackalopes were gone. I haven't seen them since, but I still hear the scratching at the windows sometimes, and the dreams still come. And I know deep down that they're still out there waiting, and I know my luck has run out for good. The air in the abandoned Cranbrook Mental Asylum was thick, stagnant, and heavy with the ghosts of forgotten sorrows. Rust gnawed at the metal window frames, and moonlight, fractured by grime-coated glass, painted grotesque patterns on the peeling walls. I, Arthur Finch, amateur urban explorer and seasoned thrill-seeker, found myself drawn to places like this, places where the past clung like cobwebs and whispered secrets to anyone foolish enough to listen. I told myself I was there to document the decay, to capture the architectural horrors with my camera. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. There was a morbid fascination, a perverse attraction to the darkness that resided within these crumbling walls. I wanted to touch the madness, to feel the echoes of desperation. The main entrance had long since been sealed, so I'd found my way in through a collapsed section of the rear wall. The stench of mildew, decay, and something indefinably human assaulted my nostrils. Each step sent tremors through the silence, the sound amplified by the cavernous emptiness. Room after room, I found the same grim tableau. Rusted beds, scattered medical records bleached by time, and graffiti that spoke of pain and torment. It was all predictable, almost cliché. I was beginning to think the stories were overblown, that the asylum was just another empty shell, another victim of neglect. Then I reached the sub-basement. The air grew colder down there, laced with a dampness that seeped into my bones. The flickering beam of my flashlight danced across the walls, revealing rows of cells, each a miniature tomb. This was where the truly lost souls had been kept, the ones deemed too dangerous, too damaged, for the world above. And then I heard it, a whisper, faint and fragile, like the flutter of a trapped moth. It seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves, a desperate plea that clawed at my sanity. "Help me!" My heart hammered against my ribs. I froze, my flashlight beam trembling in my hand. Logic screamed at me to turn back, to dismiss it as a trick of the acoustics, a phantom born of my own imagination. But the whisper came again, clearer this time, tinged with a terrible urgency. "Please help me." I followed the sound to the end of the corridor, to a cell almost completely obscured by shadow. The steel door was reinforced with heavy chains and a rusted padlock. Hesitantly, I reached out and rattled the lock. It crumbled at my touch, the rusted metal disintegrating like dust. The chains followed suit, snapping with ease. The door creaked open, revealing a figure huddled in the corner. It was a young woman, impossibly pale and thin, her eyes wide and filled with a bottomless despair. Her wrists were bound to the wall with thick leather restraints, chafing at her skin. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a croak. She didn't answer, only looked at me with those haunted eyes, her lips moving silently. Driven by a surge of adrenaline and a misguided sense of heroism, I fumbled with the restraints, finally managing to undo them. As soon as her hands were free, she launched herself at me, burying her face in my chest, her body trembling uncontrollably. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raspy and weak. "Thank you for finding me." I held her, feeling an overwhelming sense of pity and, I confess, a flicker of something else, something not entirely altruistic. I helped her out of the asylum into the cool night air. She told me her name was Eliza, and that she'd been wrongly committed years ago by a cruel and greedy relative. The story was implausible, riddled with holes, but I didn't care. I was caught in the thrill of the rescue, the hero's glow blinding me to the obvious red flags. I took her back to my apartment, gave her food, clean clothes, and a place to sleep. She was grateful, almost unnervingly so. She clung to me, her eyes constantly fixed on my face, as if afraid I would disappear. That was the first night. The second night, she was different. Gone was the frightened, fragile woman. In her place was something sharper. Her eyes burned with an intensity that made me uneasy, and her movements were fluid, almost predatory. She still clung to me, but now it felt possessive, suffocating. And then the whispers started again. Not the faint, desperate pleas from the asylum, but a different kind of whisper. A low, seductive murmur that slithered into my dreams and wrapped itself around my thoughts. "You're mine now, Arthur," it said. "You set me free. You belong to me." I tried to dismiss it as stress, as the lingering effects of my adventure in the asylum. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until I could hear them even when I was awake. A constant, unsettling hum beneath the surface of reality. Then came the thirst, a ravenous, insatiable thirst that no amount of water could quench. I felt weak, drained, as if my life force was being slowly siphoned away. One night, I woke to find Eliza standing over me, her eyes glowing in the darkness. Her face was pale and inhumanly beautiful, her lips stained a horrifying crimson. "I need you, Arthur," she whispered, her voice a silken caress. "I need your life." A cold dread washed over me, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I had made a terrible mistake. I had not rescued a damsel in distress. I had unleashed something ancient and malevolent, something that had been lurking in the shadows of the asylum for decades, waiting for a fool like me to open the door. She leaned closer, her touch sending shivers down my spine. I tried to scream, but my voice was trapped in my throat. I tried to fight her, but my limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. It was as if all the strength had been drained from my body, leaving me a hollow shell. Her lips brushed against my neck, and I felt a sharp, excruciating pain as she pierced my skin. I tasted the metallic tang of blood, my own blood, as she drank deeply, her eyes closed in ecstasy. The world began to fade, the darkness closing in around me. As my consciousness slipped away, I heard her whisper again, her voice filled with a chilling satisfaction. "You're mine now, Arthur, forever." Now every night she comes, a pale ghost in my apartment, her eyes burning with eternal hunger. I am trapped, bound to her by a debt I can never repay. My life is no longer my own. It belongs to her, to the creature I unwittingly freed from the forgotten asylum. And the worst part is, I know I deserve it. I went looking for darkness and I found it. Now I am condemned to live with it, to feed it, until the end of my days. And even then, I suspect my torment will not be over. For I am hers now, and she never lets go. The email arrived a week before my planned getaway. "Enjoy your stay at the Whispering Pines cabin. Please ensure you read and adhere to the house rules." Conveniently placed on the kitchen counter. Seemed standard enough. I was looking for a secluded weekend, a digital detox, a chance to escape the concrete jungle that had become my life. Whispering Pines, nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains, promised just that. I arrived late Friday evening, the GPS losing its signal miles before the cabin. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The cabin itself was rustic, charming in a slightly unsettling way, like a painting that looks beautiful from afar, but reveals unsettling details upon closer inspection. Inside, it was as advertised, cozy, wood-paneled, and filled with that peculiar old house smell of dust and forgotten memories. The house rules were indeed on the kitchen counter, laminated and pristine. Most were the usual. No smoking inside, clean up after yourself, quiet hours after 10 p.m. But then there was rule number 7, printed in a noticeably bolder font. Light the black candle at midnight. A black candle, tucked away in a drawer next to a box of matches, was just that. A thick, ebony pillar of wax. It looked old, almost ancient, with strange symbols etched into its surface. I scoffed. Some quirky attempt at creating atmosphere, I figured. I had no intention of lighting it. I was here for peace and quiet, not spooky rituals. The first night passed uneventfully. I cooked myself a simple meal, read a book by the fire, and fell asleep to the sound of crickets chirping outside. But something felt off, an unease that settled in my stomach like a cold stone. I dismissed it as the unfamiliar surroundings and the long drive. Saturday was spent hiking through the dense forest. The silence was profound, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the occasional call of a bird. The isolation was both exhilarating and unsettling. I started to feel like I was being watched, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but there was never anything there. As the sun began to set, the feeling intensified. Back at the cabin, the shadows seemed to lengthen and deepen, clinging to the corners of the room. I started to feel paranoid, imagining faces in the wood grain of the walls. I tried to rationalize it away. I was tired, stressed, and letting my imagination run wild. But then I remembered the candle. The black candle. Midnight approached slowly, each tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway echoing through the cabin like a death knell. I found myself drawn to the kitchen, to the drawer where the candle lay waiting. Curiosity, or perhaps something darker, had taken hold. Against my better judgment, I took the candle out. It felt heavy in my hand, strangely warm. The symbols carved into its surface seemed to pulse with a faint, inner light. I found the matches and struck one. The flame flickered, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. I hesitated. This was ridiculous. I was a rational adult, not some teenager playing with a Ouija board. But the unease, the feeling of being watched, the oppressive silence, it all seemed to coalesce, urging me on. With a deep breath, I touched the flame to the wick. The candle sputtered to life, emitting a thick, black smoke that smelled of sulfur and something else, something indefinably ancient and foul. The flame burned unnaturally high, casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist on their own. And then the whispers began. At first, they were faint, barely audible, like the rustling of leaves in a distant wind. But they grew louder, closer, until they were swirling around me. A chorus of voices murmuring in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow comprehended. The shadows on the walls began to move, to coalesce into shapes that resembled grotesque figures, their limbs elongated and twisted, their faces obscured by darkness. They stretched towards me, reaching with long, claw-like fingers. Panic seized me. I tried to blow out the candle, but the flame wouldn't extinguish. It burned brighter, hotter, the black wax melting at an alarming rate, pooling at the base of the candle. And then I saw it. The melting wax was not just pooling. It was reforming. It was taking shape, solidifying into something organic, something fleshy and grotesque, with glistening black eyes that stared up at me with malevolent intelligence. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a single, chilling phrase. The offering is accepted. Terror paralyzed me. I was trapped, caught in a nightmare I couldn't escape. The shadows crawled higher, engulfing the walls, the ceiling, the entire room. The grotesque figures were closer now, their icy breath on my skin. The creature forming from the wax pulsed with an unholy energy. I could feel its gaze boring into me, probing my thoughts, my fears, my soul. It was hungry, insatiable, and it wanted something from me. I stumbled backward, desperate to escape, but the shadows blocked my path. They were solid now, tangible, pressing in on me, suffocating me. "What do you want?" I managed to croak, my voice trembling with fear. The whispers answered, a chorus of voices speaking in unison. "Everything." The creature lunged. I screamed, a primal cry of terror that was swallowed by the darkness. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But then, silence. I cautiously opened my eyes. The shadows were gone. The whispers had ceased. The grotesque figures had vanished. Only the candle remained, still burning brightly. The creature formed from the wax, staring up at me with its cold, black eyes. I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. Had it all been a hallucination? A nightmare brought on by stress and isolation? But then I looked down at my hand. There, etched into my palm, were the same strange symbols that were carved into the candle. They glowed faintly, pulsing with the same unholy light. The horror washed over me again, even stronger than before. It wasn't over. It had only just begun. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was now bound to whatever dark entity had been summoned by that black candle. I was an offering, a vessel, a pawn in a game I didn't understand. I ran out of the cabin, into the darkness of the forest, desperate to escape, to find help, to break the curse that had been placed upon me. But I knew, deep down, that there was no escape. The shadows would follow me, the whispers would haunt me, and the creature formed from the wax would always be watching, waiting to claim its due. The Airbnb's nightly ritual was complete, and I was its victim. I should have just enjoyed my weekend. The stale, cloying scent of beeswax and formaldehyde hung heavy in the air, a perfume I'd grown accustomed to, if not fond of, over the past 5 years. Working at the Grand Majestic Wax Museum wasn't exactly my dream job, but it paid the bills and left me with enough time to pursue my writing. Or at least think about pursuing my writing. It was a quiet place. Really, aside from the shuffling tourists and the occasional shrieks from the horror exhibit. Most of the time, it was just me and them, the figures. Countless historical figures, Hollywood icons, and notorious criminals, all frozen in time, their waxen eyes staring out into the silent halls. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, a feeling of being watched, a prickling on the back of my neck when I was alone, arranging velvet ropes or dusting display cases. Then came the unsettling details, the way their eyes seemed to follow me as I moved through the rooms. It was an optical illusion, I told myself. Clever sculpting, designed to draw you in. But then came the Lincoln incident. I was making my rounds late last week, locking up for the night. I paused in front of the Abraham Lincoln display, admiring the painstaking detail. The subtle lines etched into his brow, the melancholic gaze in his eyes. As I turned to leave, I could have sworn, I swear to God, that he winked. A slow, deliberate wink. I stood there, frozen, staring back at the impassive face. Maybe it was the flickering gas lamps, playing tricks on my tired eyes. Maybe it was the stress of a looming deadline for a writing competition I wasn't even close to finishing. I chalked it up to fatigue and went home, but the image of Lincoln's winking haunted my dreams. Then, yesterday, Mark disappeared. Mark was a good guy, a bit of a joker, always ready with a sarcastic quip. He'd worked at the museum even longer than I had, and knew every nook and cranny, every dusty secret. He was supposed to open the museum this morning, but he never showed. I came in an hour later, worried, and called his cell. No answer. Old Man Hemlock, the museum director, a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and steeped in embalming fluid, simply shrugged. Probably just a bender. Happens to the best of them. But I knew Mark. He wasn't the type to just disappear without a word. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I started searching, retracing his steps, asking the other employees if they'd seen him. Nothing. Finally, I found myself in the Crime Victims exhibit. This was the museum's biggest draw, a macabre collection of figures depicting famous victims of violent crimes. Lizzie Borden's parents, Sharon Tate, even a tragically rendered JonBenet Ramsey. I usually avoided this section. It was too unsettling. As I scanned the room, my blood ran cold. There, standing amongst the other figures, was Mark. He was dressed in his usual uniform, the maroon vest and khaki pants, his name tag still pinned to his chest. His posture was stiff, unnatural. He was a wax figure, but it wasn't just any wax figure. It was Mark. His features were perfectly rendered, down to the slightly crooked front tooth and the small scar above his left eyebrow. But something was terribly, terribly wrong. His face. His mouth was frozen in a silent scream, his eyes wide with unimaginable terror. It was a look of pure, unadulterated horror, a look that would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my days. I reached out, hesitantly, and touched his arm. It was warm, not human warm, but like freshly poured wax, still retaining some heat. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't right. This wasn't possible. I ran out of the Crime Victims exhibit, out of the museum, out into the blessedly normal sunlight. I stumbled down the street, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I went straight to the police. They listened to my story with polite skepticism, their eyes glazed over with the boredom of dealing with another eccentric. They agreed to send an officer to the museum to investigate, but I could tell they didn't take me seriously. I knew I had to go back. I owed it to Mark, and if I was being honest with myself, I needed to know the truth, no matter how horrifying it might be. Armed with a flashlight and a heavy steel pipe I grabbed from my garage, I returned to the Grand Majestic Wax Museum after midnight. The place was even creepier in the dark, the shadows playing tricks on my eyes, the silence broken only by the creaks and groans of the old building settling. I made my way to the Crime Victims exhibit, my heart hammering in my chest. The gas lamps were turned low, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. Mark was still there, still screaming silently. I approached him cautiously, the steel pipe clutched tightly in my hand. As I got closer, I noticed something else. A faint scent, not the usual beeswax and formaldehyde, but something metallic. Blood. I shined my flashlight on his face, the frozen scream, the wide, terrified eyes. And then I saw it, a small, almost imperceptible crack in the wax, just above his left temple. A trickle of dark red liquid oozed from the crack, staining the collar of his uniform. This wasn't wax. This was Mark. He was still alive, trapped. A wave of nausea washed over me. I had to get him out. I had to do something. I raised the steel pipe, intending to smash the wax around his face, to free him from his horrifying prison. But as I did, I heard a sound, a soft, almost imperceptible chuckle. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I spun around, my flashlight beam dancing across the silent figures. They were all watching me. Their waxen eyes seemed to gleam with malevolent amusement. Then a voice, a low, raspy whisper that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. "He's one of us now." I froze. My blood turned to ice. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that I wasn't alone. The figures began to move, slowly, haltingly, like puppets with rusty joints. Lincoln took a step forward. Marilyn Monroe smiled a predatory smile. Jack the Ripper chuckled, a chilling, guttural sound. I dropped the steel pipe and stumbled back, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. This was a nightmare. The voice whispered again, closer this time. "We need more." I turned and ran, blindly, desperately, through the halls of the museum. The figures were closing in, their footsteps echoing behind me. I could hear their whispers, their laughter, their promises of eternal life. I reached the front door and burst out into the night, gasping for breath, my lungs burning. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, until my legs gave out and I collapsed on the sidewalk, sobbing. I don't know how long I lay there. Eventually, The first rays of dawn peeked over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. I stood up, my body aching, my mind shattered. I knew I couldn't go back to the museum. Not ever. But I also knew that I couldn't just forget what I'd seen. I had to tell someone. I had to warn them. I started writing. I wrote everything down, every detail, every horrifying moment. I wrote about Mark, about the winking Lincoln, about the figures coming to life. I wrote until my fingers ached and my eyes burned. I don't know if anyone will believe me. I don't even know if I believe myself. But I had to try. The grand, majestic wax museum still stands on Elm Street. Tourists still flock to see its macabre wonders. And somewhere, trapped inside a prison of wax, Mark is still screaming. And I can't shake the feeling that they're waiting for me to come back. Waiting for me to join them. Waiting for me to become one of them. The GPS blinked mockingly at me, its cheerful blue arrow a stark contrast to the dread clawing at my gut. Recalculating, it chirped, as if leading me down a barely, their logging road, swallowed whole by ancient, gnarled trees, was perfectly normal. I should have turned back miles ago. Should have marked the package as undeliverable and called it a night. But the bonus, the end-of-month delivery bonus, was singing a siren song to my empty bank account. Now, the only song I heard was the rustle of unseen things in the undergrowth and the frantic thumping of my own heart. The road finally opened into a small, overgrown clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated cabin, its windows like vacant eyes staring out from beneath a sagging, moss-covered roof. It looked like something out of a nightmare, lifted whole from a forgotten Grimm's fairy tale. Delivery address confirmed. The GPS announced, its voice sickeningly cheerful. I killed the engine, the oppressive silence crashing around me like a physical weight. Swallowing hard, I grabbed the package, a ridiculously oversized box filled with, I didn't know what. The order had come through late, with a vague description and a hefty upfront payment. Another red flag I'd ignored, blinded by dollar signs. As I approached the cabin, the door creaked open, revealing a figure shrouded in shadows. My breath hitched. It was a child, no older than 10, with skin so pale it seemed to glow in the dim light. Their eyes, impossibly large and dark, fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. "You have the package," the child whispered, their voice a strange, unsettling blend of innocence and ancient weariness. I managed a weak nod, my throat suddenly dry. "Why, yes. Sign here, please." I held out the electronic tablet, my hand trembling. The child glided forward, their movement fluid and unnatural. They didn't touch the tablet. Instead, a shimmering, almost invisible hand seemed to materialize from thin air and scribble something on the screen. The signature came back as a series of indecipherable symbols. "The payment," the child said, and held out a small, intricately carved wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were gold coins. Real gold coins, old, tarnished, and undeniably real. My mind reeled. This wasn't right. None of this was right. This was some kind of elaborate prank, or worse. I took the box, my fingers brushing against the cold, heavy metal. "Thank you," I managed to croak out. I should be going." As I turned to leave, a soft, melodic voice echoed from the depths of the cabin. It sounded like a lullaby, but with an underlying tone of menace that sent shivers down my spine. "Stay," the child whispered, their dark eyes boring into me. "We need a driver." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy with unspoken meaning. I backed away slowly, my hand instinctively reaching for the keys in my pocket. That's when I saw it. My tires, all 4 tires, slashed. The rubber lay in ribbons on the muddy ground. Panic seized me, cold and absolute. I spun around, desperate to get back to the relative safety of the road, of civilization. But the forest seemed to close in around me, its shadows deepening, its silence amplifying. I ran. The child's laughter echoed behind me, a high-pitched, chilling sound that spurred me on. I stumbled through the undergrowth, branches tearing at my clothes, thorns ripping at my skin. My lungs burned, My legs screamed in protest, but I kept running. I had to. Then I saw them. Headlights. Driving lights that cut through the oppressive darkness, offering a beacon of hope. Relief flooded me, so intense it almost brought me to my knees. Someone was coming. Someone could help. I ran towards the lights, yelling, waving my arms frantically. Help! Help me! But as I got closer, a new wave of terror washed over me, even more potent than the first. The headlights, they were coming from the forest. They were getting closer, but there was no car, no discernible vehicle of any kind, just two bright, unwavering beams of light, piercing the darkness, impossibly suspended in midair. And behind them, I could see them, shapes, shifting, amorphous shapes moving within the light, their forms indistinct and terrifying. They were tall and gaunt, their limbs impossibly long and spindly. They moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, their presence radiating an aura of ancient, malevolent power. I screamed, a primal scream born of pure, unadulterated fear. I turned and ran again, fueled by a desperate surge of adrenaline. The headlights followed, their relentless pursuit a constant reminder of the horror that was closing in. The child's voice, now amplified and echoing through the trees, taunted me. "You can't escape. We need a driver." I didn't know what they needed a driver for. I didn't want to know. All I knew was that I had to get away. I plunged deeper into the forest, heedless of the dangers that lurked within. I scrambled over fallen logs, waded through icy streams, and clawed my way through dense thickets. The headlights were still behind me, their relentless glow a constant presence in my peripheral vision. Then I saw it, a faint glimmer of light in the distance. The road. Hope surged through me, renewed and invigorating. I pushed myself harder, my muscles burning, and my lungs aching, but I could see the road. It was so close. I burst out of the trees and stumbled onto the asphalt, collapsing to my knees in exhaustion. I looked back, expecting to see the headlights bearing down on me, but they were gone, vanished. I lay there for a long time, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. I didn't dare move, afraid that the slightest sound would draw them back. Finally, when I could no longer feel the presence of the unseen horrors, I slowly got to my feet. I started walking, putting one foot in front of the other, desperate to reach civilization, to escape the nightmare that had consumed me. It took hours, but I finally made it to a small town. A gas station, brightly lit and reassuringly normal. I stumbled inside, babbling incoherently to the bewildered cashier, who stared at me with a mixture of concern and suspicion. I told them about the cabin, the child, the gold, the slashed tires, and the headlights. They looked at me like I was insane. "There's nothing out there," the cashier said, shaking his head. "Just woods, and an old abandoned logging camp. Hasn't been used in 50 years. I spent the night in a cheap motel room, the gold coins clutched tightly in my hand. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the child's pale face, the headlights in the forest, and the shifting shapes within the light. The next morning, I went to the police. I told them everything. They listened politely, took notes, and then told me they would investigate. I never heard from them again. I still have the gold coins. I keep them locked away in a safe, a constant reminder of the horror I experienced that night. I never quit my job as a delivery driver, but I will never, ever deliver to a rural address again, especially if it is dark and the GPS keeps leading me further and further away from civilization. I know with a certainty that chills me to the bone that they are still out there, waiting for a driver, and if I'm not careful, they might just find me again. The forest always remembers, and it never forgets. The attic air hangs thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket of dust and forgotten memories. Each breath tastes of mothballs and regret. I haven't been up here in years, not since the incident. But the letter from my sister, Sarah, arrived yesterday frantic, bordering on hysterical, and I knew I had to face it. Face him. Sarah's letter was brief, scrawled in a handwriting I barely recognized, a jittery mess of ink on cheap paper. It's happening again, Michael. He's coming. The tapes, you have to burn them. All of them. He was the shadowy figure that plagued our family home videos. A creeping dread that had consumed our childhoods and ultimately destroyed our family. He was the reason Dad drank himself to oblivion. The reason Mom retreated into a world of silent prayer. The reason Sarah and I scattered to opposite ends of the country, hoping distance could somehow erase the horror etched onto celluloid. With a sigh, I rummaged through the cobweb-laden boxes, my fingers tracing the faded labels. Christmas 88, Sarah's birthday 92, trip to Disney World 95, each one a snapshot of happier times, each one tainted by the creeping presence that lurked in the background. Started subtly. In the early tapes, a barely perceptible shadow in the periphery, a flicker at the edge of the frame. We dismissed it as a trick of the light, a malfunctioning bulb, anything but what it seemed to be. But as the years progressed, the shadow solidified, became more defined. A tall, gaunt figure with elongated limbs and eyes that seemed to drink the light around them. He always stood in the background, just out of focus, but undeniably there. Year after year, in each successive tape, he moved closer. A few feet closer each time. We never saw him while filming, never felt his presence. Only when we gathered around the television, eager to relive cherished moments, did he reveal himself, a silent, menacing observer of our joy. Dad, always the pragmatist, tried everything to debunk it. He blamed faulty equipment, weird lighting, even suggested it was a neighbor playing a prank. But deep down, I think he knew. We all knew. The growing unease in his eyes, the tightness in Mom's prayers, the way Sarah and I started clinging to each other in the dark. It was all evidence of the creeping dread that was slowly engulfing us. The final tape. I dreaded finding it. Sarah's graduation, 99. I remember the day vividly. The pride in Mom's eyes, the awkward hug from Dad, Sarah's radiant smile. But all I could see, even then, was the dark figure standing just behind the camera, his featureless face tilted towards us. I find the tape tucked away in a smaller box as if someone had tried to hide it. The plastic case is cracked, and the label faded. My hands tremble as I slide it into my old VHS player, the machine whirring to life with a groan. The grainy images flicker on the small television I've set up. There we are, younger, happier, oblivious. Mom adjusting Sarah's graduation gown, Dad fumbling with his tie. Sarah beams at the camera, her eyes sparkling with hope. And then I see him. He's not in the background anymore. He's standing just behind Dad, his hand outstretched, almost touching his shoulder. His face is still obscured, but I can make out the chilling detail of his skeletal fingers. Dad turns towards the camera, a wide grin on his face. Smile for the camera, everyone, and then the figure moves. He leans into the frame, his dark eyes fixed on the lens, on me. A cold wave washes over me, a primal fear that claws at my insides. I feel a presence in the room, a suffocating weight that presses down on me. The camera abruptly cuts off. A jolt of static, then nothing. Dad must have stopped filming. But the image, the figure's piercing gaze, is burned into my retina. I eject the tape, my hands shaking so violently I can barely grip it. I have to burn them, all of them. As I gather the tapes, a chilling realization dawns on me. Sarah's letter. She said he was coming again. That means he's been gone. But where did he go? Then I hear it. A faint rustling behind me. A soft, labored breathing. I freeze and every muscle in my body tenses. I slowly turn around, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Nothing. Just the shadows cast by the single bare bulb hanging from the attic ceiling. I tell myself it's my imagination. The stress, the fear, the years of repressed trauma. But the breathing continues, closer now, more distinct. And then a sound. A faint, almost imperceptible clatter. The sound of film reels being knocked together. I spin around again, searching the shadows, my eyes darting from corner to corner. He's there, standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light of the hallway. Taller than I remember, his limbs impossibly long and thin. His face is still obscured, a void of darkness, but I can feel his eyes on me, burning into me. He takes a step forward. The clatter of film reels intensifies, a cacophony of dread. I stumble backwards, knocking over a stack of boxes. Old photographs spill out onto the floor, faces of long-dead relatives staring up at me with vacant eyes. He takes another step. I scramble to my feet, grabbing the box of tapes. I have to get out of here. I have to burn them, but he's too fast. He lunges forward, his long, skeletal fingers reaching for me. I scream, a primal sound of terror that rips through the silence of the attic. I throw the box of tapes at him, a desperate act of defense. The tapes scatter across the floor, bouncing off him harmlessly. He doesn't even flinch. He's upon me now, his cold, skeletal hand grasping my throat. I gasp for air, my vision blurring. The last thing I see is his face, finally revealed in the dim light. It's a mask of pure, unadulterated evil, featureless except for two gaping holes where his eyes should be. And in those holes, I see something far more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. I see myself, and then darkness. The clatter of film reels continues, echoing in the silent attic. The family VHS curse had claimed another victim. The tape is ready to be rolled, and the next subject is in line for the family VHS curse. The dampness clung to everything, a clammy hand on my skin as I pushed through the undergrowth. The forest floor was a tapestry of decaying leaves, their earthy scent laced with the metallic tang of rain. We'd been hiking for hours, the thrill of exploration slowly giving way to the gnawing anxiety of being utterly, hopelessly lost. It started as a simple weekend getaway. Me, Mark, Jane, and April. For friends, seasoned hikers, confident in our abilities. But a wrong turn, a sudden fog, and an unshakable sense of disorientation had led us deeper and deeper into this suffocating wilderness. Then I found it, tucked beneath a moss-covered log, a battered, leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed, brittle with age, filled with a spidery, frantic handwriting. I hesitated, a prickle of unease crawling up my spine, but curiosity won. I flipped it open, the musty smell assaulting my nostrils. The first entry was dated Day 1. It spoke of a solo hiker, lost and searching for a way back to civilization. The entries continued, detailing his dwindling supplies, his mounting fear, his desperate attempts to retrace his steps. Then came the chilling entry, Day 23. They're mimicking rescue teams. Heard voices in the distance, calling for me. Sounded just like the rangers I know, but something felt wrong, something off. My blood ran cold. I glanced up, scanning the surrounding trees, a sudden paranoia seizing me. I read on, my heart hammering against my ribs. Day 28. The voices are closer now, more insistent. They know my name. They're promising help, but I can't trust them. I saw one of them. It looked wrong. The face was stretched, like a mask slipping. God, I need to get out of here. The entries became increasingly erratic, filled with fragmented thoughts, paranoid ramblings, and desperate pleas for salvation. Then the final entry, scrawled in what looked like a desperate frenzy. Day 45. I'm one of them now. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I slammed the journal shut, my hands trembling uncontrollably. A twig snapped behind me, the sound echoing through the oppressive silence of the woods. Over here! A voice yelled, startlingly close. It was a male voice, clear and strong, filled with reassuring authority. We're here to help. Are you lost? My breath hitched. I knew that voice. It sounded like Ranger Thompson, a man I'd met on previous hikes. But the journal warned me. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Mark, Jane, and April were already moving towards the sound, their faces alight with hope. Wait, I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. Don't go. It's a trap. They stopped, their expressions a mixture of confusion and annoyance. What are you talking about? Mark asked, his brow furrowed. They're here to help us get out of this mess. I held up the journal, my hand shaking so violently I could barely keep it steady. I found this. Read it. Please, just read it. Jane took the journal from me, her eyes widening as she scanned the pages. April peered over her shoulder, her face paling as she took in the increasingly disturbing entries. Mark remained skeptical, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the direction of the voice. "This is just some crazy story," he said dismissively. "Some hiker got lost and went insane. It doesn't mean anything." "But what if it's true?" pleaded. "What if there's something out here, mimicking rescue teams, trying to lure us in?" "There's nothing out here," Mark insisted, his voice laced with impatience. "Just trees and dirt and us being hopelessly lost. I'm going to take my chances with the rescue team." He turned and started walking towards the sound, his pace quickening with each step. "Mark, no," I yelled, but he didn't stop. Jane and April exchanged worried glances. "I don't know, guys," Jane said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This journal is pretty creepy." "Me neither," April agreed, her eyes darting nervously around us. "I don't trust that voice. Something feels wrong." "Then let's get out of here," I said, my voice urgent. "We need to find a way back on our own, before it's too late." We turned and started walking in the opposite direction, our pace quick and determined. But the voice followed us, relentless and unwavering. "Don't be afraid. We're here to help. Just come back. We know the way." The voice was closer now, the tone more insistent, more demanding. It was joined by other voices, all calling our names, all promising salvation. The sound was disorienting, overwhelming, making it hard to think, hard to breathe. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the trees ahead, blocking our path. It was a man, dressed in a ranger uniform, his face obscured by the shadows of his hat. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice smooth and reassuring. "We've been looking for you. Come with me. I'll lead you to safety." I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. He looked like a ranger, he sounded like a ranger, but something was terribly, irrevocably wrong. His smile was too wide, too fixed, his eyes too bright, too intense. "Stay back," I yelled, grabbing Jane and April and pulling them behind me. "We don't trust you." The ranger chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Don't be silly," he said. "We just want to help. Why are you being so difficult?" He took a step closer and I saw it. A flicker of something unnatural in his eyes. A glimpse of something dark and malevolent lurking beneath the surface. His face seemed to stretch, to distort, like the mask was indeed slipping. I knew then that the journal was right. These weren't rescue teams. These were something else, something sinister, something ancient and evil that had taken root in these woods. We turned and ran, our feet pounding against the forest floor, the voices chasing us, relentless and unwavering. We ran until our lungs burned, until our legs screamed in protest, until we could run no more. We collapsed in a small clearing, gasping for breath, our bodies trembling with exhaustion and fear. But we knew we couldn't stay there. They would find us eventually. "We need to find shelter," I said, my voice hoarse. "Somewhere we can defend ourselves." We stumbled through the woods, searching for a hiding place, a refuge from the unseen horrors that stalked us. We found a small cave, hidden behind a thick curtain of vines. It was damp and dark, but it offered a modicum of protection. We huddled together, shivering with cold and fear, listening to the voices that echoed through the trees. They were closer now, more insistent, their tone growing increasingly menacing. We spent the rest of the day in the cave, our nerves stretched to the breaking point. As darkness fell, the voices grew louder, more numerous. They surrounded us, their whispers slithering through the cracks in the cave walls, filling our minds with dread. Then we heard the footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps approaching the cave entrance. We held our breath, our hearts pounding in our chests, knowing what was coming. A figure appeared in the entrance, silhouetted against the faint moonlight. It was the ranger, his face now clearly visible, his features twisted into a grotesque parody of a human face. Come out, wherever you are," he crooned, his voice dripping with malice. "We know you're in there. It's time to join us." I grabbed a sharp rock from the cave floor, my hand trembling with adrenaline. This was it. This was the end. But as the ranger stepped further into the cave, a scream pierced the night. It was April. Before I could react, something yanked her out of the cave, her screams echoing through the trees before abruptly being cut short. Jane and I stared at each other in horror, our faces illuminated by the ranger's malevolent grin. "Now," he said, his voice soft and persuasive. "Who's next?" I knew then that we were doomed. We were trapped in this nightmarish forest, hunted by creatures that mimicked humanity but were anything but human. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that we would soon become one of them. The woods would claim another lost soul, just like the hiker in the journal, just like Mark, just like April, and soon just like Jane and me. The forest doesn't let go, keeps you, transforms you, makes you one of them. The first time I saw it, I dismissed it as neighborhood watch gone a bit too far. A large, black German shepherd, perched at the edge of Mr. Abernathy's manicured lawn, staring directly at my living room window. It was unsettling, sure, but Abernathy was known for being meticulous, overprotective. Maybe he'd finally cracked and gotten a guard dog. I pulled the curtains closed with a sigh, muttering about property values and the general decline of civilized society. That should have been the end of it, except it wasn't. The next day, the dog was there again. Same spot, same unwavering gaze. This time, I tried ignoring it. I poured myself a coffee, cranked up the radio, and settled into my armchair with a book. But I could feel its eyes on me, burning through the brick and plaster of my house, boring into my skull. I peeked through the curtains. Still there. This went on for days. Every morning, it was there. A dark sentinel posted on the edge of Abernathy's property. It never barked, never whined, never even shifted its weight. Just stood there, a statue of canine intensity. It never blinked. That was the detail that really started to fray my nerves. Dogs blinked. All living things blinked. This thing just watched. I started avoiding the living room. I'd eat breakfast in the kitchen, work in my study, even watch TV in the spare bedroom. Anything to avoid those eyes, but I still felt them. In the back of my mind, a constant low hum of unease. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I decided to have a glass of wine and try to relax. I figured the dog would be gone after dark. I was wrong. As I drew the curtains, I saw it. Bathed in the pale glow of the streetlights, it was even more unnerving. Its fur seemed to absorb the light, leaving it a solid, impenetrable black. And then I saw it. It was standing on its hind legs, not playfully, not begging for a treat. It was rigidly upright, its front paws raised. And then, with a deliberate, almost human gesture, it tapped on the window. A soft, insistent tap. I recoiled, dropping my wine glass. The sound of shattering glass echoed in the sudden silence, momentarily drowning out the frantic hammering of my heart. When I dared to look again, the dog was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat huddled in my armchair, every creak and groan of the house amplifying my terror. I envisioned the dog lurking outside, its unwavering eyes fixed on my window, waiting. The next morning, fueled by caffeine and desperation, I marched across the perfectly mowed lawn to Mr. Abernathy's door. He answered, his face a mask of polite bewilderment. "Mr. Abernathy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need to talk to you about your dog." His eyebrows shot up. "My dog," he chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "I'm afraid you have me confused, Mr. Davies. I don't have a dog. Never have." I felt a chill run down my spine. "But there's a German shepherd. It's been standing on your lawn, staring at my house, for days." Abernathy's expression turned serious. "Mr. Davies, I assure you, there is no dog. I'm quite allergic, you see. And besides, I'm rather meticulous about my lawn." A dog simply wouldn't do. He looked at me with genuine concern, as if I were the one who had lost his mind. I stammered, tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words sounded ridiculous even to my own ears. "Perhaps you're mistaken," Abernathy said gently. "Maybe it belongs to someone further down the street. I'd hate to think you're letting your imagination run wild, Mr. Davies. It's bad for the nerves, you know?" I left Abernathy's house feeling more disturbed than ever. Had I imagined it all? Was I hallucinating? The stress at work had been intense lately. Maybe I was simply cracking under the pressure. But I knew what I had seen. I knew the cold, unwavering intensity of those eyes. That night, I set up a camera pointed directly at the living room window. I told myself it was for my own peace of mind, proof that I wasn't crazy. The next morning, I checked the footage. Hour after hour of empty lawn, swaying trees, and the occasional passing car. Then, at precisely 3:17 a.m., it appeared. The dog, solid black against the pre-dawn darkness, standing in the exact same spot. It stood there for what felt like an eternity, its head cocked slightly, as if listening. And then, it rose up on its hind legs. The camera shook as I zoomed in, my hand trembling. The dog's face was expressionless, almost eerily human. And then, it tapped on the window. I paused the footage, my breath catching in my throat. It was right there, undeniable proof. I rewound it, watched it again and again. The dog, the tap, the chilling, unwavering gaze. I didn't go to work that day. I spent the entire day researching German Shepherds, dog behavior, anything that could explain what I was seeing. But nothing made sense. Dogs didn't stand upright like that. They didn't tap on windows. And they certainly didn't disappear when you went outside to confront them. As night fell, a sense of dread settled over me. I knew it would be back. I could feel it, a dark premonition that clung to me like a shroud. I barricaded myself in the living room, armed with a baseball bat and a flashlight. I kept the curtains drawn, the lights off, listening to every creak and groan of the house. And then I heard it, a soft scratching, low and persistent, coming from the window. My heart leaped into my throat. I gripped the baseball bat, my knuckles bone white. I took a deep breath and slowly pulled back the curtain. The dog was there. Its eyes glinted in the darkness, reflecting the faint light from the street. It was standing on its hind legs, its paws pressed against the glass. But this time, something was different. Its mouth was open, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth, and a low, guttural growl emanated from its throat, a sound that resonated deep within my bones. And then it spoke. The voice was raspy, distorted, but undeniably there, a chilling whisper that cut through the silence. "Let me in." I froze, paralyzed by terror. My mind struggled to comprehend what I was hearing. Talking dog? This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare. But it was real. The dog's eyes burned into me, demanding, insistent. "Let me in," it repeated, the growl intensifying. "I've been waiting." I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I could only stare, transfixed by the creature before me. And then the scratching stopped. The dog lowered itself to all fours, its eyes still fixed on me. It took a step back, away from the window. I braced myself, expecting it to disappear, but it didn't. Instead, it turned its head, its gaze shifting to something behind me. I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck, a voice just inches from my ear. "He doesn't have a say in the matter." I didn't scream, couldn't. I just felt the cold, sharp pain as something tore into my flesh. The last thing I saw was the dog, standing over me, its eyes no longer unwavering, but filled with a ravenous hunger. The Abernathy's finally sold the house. The new owners were delighted with the neighborhood. They even commented on how quiet the street was. Mr. Abernathy continued to meticulously maintain his lawn. He was very particular about it, you see, and he needed to keep it pristine. After all, a good dog needs a good place to be buried. The fluorescent lights of the diner hummed, casting a sickly yellow glow on the checkered tablecloth. My stomach growled. A low, persistent rumble that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. I knew I shouldn't be here, not after Grandma's warning. But the smell of sizzling beef had been a siren song I couldn't resist. "Just a burger, please," I mumbled to the waitress, a tired-looking woman with a name tag that read Marge. She nodded wearily, already halfway to the kitchen. My conscience pricked at me. Decades of vegetarianism, etched into our family history, all about to crumble for a fleeting moment of satisfaction. "The hunger will wake," Grandma had always said, her voice a low, gravelly rasp that sent chills down my spine. "The hunger that sleeps in the blood. It craves what it shouldn't, what was denied to us long ago." I'd always dismissed it as the ramblings of an old woman, superstitious nonsense passed down through generations. We didn't eat meat, simple as that. It was tradition, a family quirk, a way of life. Until now, the burger arrived, a glistening, juicy mountain of meat nestled between sesame seed buns. Smelled divine. I hesitated only for a second before taking a bite. The explosion of flavor was overwhelming, a primal satisfaction that resonated deep within me. It was incredible. That was 3 weeks ago. Now I understand. I understand the hunger. It started subtly, a persistent gnawing in my stomach that no amount of vegetables could satiate. Then came the cravings, vivid fantasies of tearing into raw, bloody flesh. The smell of meat became intoxicating, driving me to the brink of madness. I tried to fight it. I doubled down on my vegetarian diet, choking down tasteless tofu and bland salads. I meditated, desperately trying to quiet the ravenous beast that was stirring within me. But it was no use. The hunger grew stronger, consuming me from the inside out. One evening, I found myself driving aimlessly, drawn by an invisible force. I ended up on a deserted stretch of highway, the air thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. That's when I saw it. A raccoon, lying mangled on the shoulder of the road, its lifeless eyes staring blankly at the sky. I should have called animal control. I should have driven away, but I didn't. The hunger was too strong. It twisted my gut, clawed at my throat, screamed in my mind. I pulled over, my hands shaking, my stomach churning. I don't remember much of what happened next. Just a blur of adrenaline, a sickening crunch of bone, and the hot metallic taste of blood on my tongue. When I finally came to, I was covered in gore, my clothes ripped, my hands stained crimson. The raccoon was gone. The shame and horror washed over me in waves. What had I done? What was happening to me? I stumbled back to my car, my body trembling, my mind reeling. I drove home in a daze, praying that it was all a nightmare. But it wasn't. The hunger remained, a constant, gnawing reminder of my transgression. My brother, David, found me the next day. He's always been the practical one, the voice of reason in our eccentric family. He saw the bloodstains on my clothes, the wild look in my eyes. He didn't need an explanation. "Grandma was right, wasn't she?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, unable to speak. The truth hung heavy in the air between us, a dark, unspoken curse that had finally come to claim me. "We need to figure this out," David said, his eyes filled with fear and determination. "There has to be a way to stop it." We spent the next few days researching, poring over ancient family documents and dusty folklore books. We learned about the origins of the curse, a tale of betrayal, starvation, and a pact made in desperation. Our ancestors, during a time of famine, had resorted to unspeakable acts to survive. The hunger, a consequence of their sin, was passed down through the bloodline, dormant until awakened by the taste of meat. The only solution, according to the texts, was complete abstinence. A lifetime of denying the flesh, a constant battle against the primal urge. But for me, it was too late. The hunger had taken root. I could feel it now, a palpable presence that pulsed beneath my skin. To sharpen my senses, amplified my instincts. I could smell things I never noticed before. The damp earth, the decaying leaves, the faint, musky scent of animals nearby. And then I smelled David. He was hiding. I knew it. He had seen the roadkill incident. The horror etched on his face was something I'd never forget. He knew I was different, dangerous. He was right to be afraid. I stalked through the house, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight. The air is thick with the scent of his fear. The coppery aroma of his blood heightens the thrill of the hunt. I can hear his ragged breaths, the frantic thumping of his heart. "David!" I call out, my voice a low, guttural growl that barely resembles my own. "Don't hide. I just want to talk." Liar. I know he's in the basement. I can smell him down there, huddled in the darkness. He always felt safe in the basement, surrounded by his old toys and forgotten dreams. But there's no safety now. Not from me. Not from the hunger. I descend the creaking stairs, the darkness closing in around me. The air is cold and damp, heavy with the scent of mildew and decay. I can hear him whimpering, a pathetic sound that only fuels the monster within me. "Please, Sarah," he begs, his voice cracking with terror. "Stay away from me." "I can't, David," I reply, my voice a mere whisper. "The hunger won't let me." I see him then, huddled in a corner, his eyes wide with terror. He's clutching a rusty pipe, his knuckles white with fear. "I don't want to hurt you," I say, but the words are hollow, meaningless. The hunger has complete control now. He swings the pipe, a desperate, pathetic attempt to defend himself. Connects with my shoulder, but I barely feel it. The pain is insignificant compared to the burning, insatiable need that consumes me. I lunge at him, my teeth bared, my eyes burning with a primal rage. He screams a long, piercing cry that echoes through the house. Then silence. The hunger is satisfied, for now, but I know it will return. It always does. It's the family curse, the dark passenger in our blood. And now it's living in me, and I fear it lives in the blood of my brother too. Waking it was my mistake. It's a beast that cannot be put back to sleep. All I can do is succumb to the beast, and perhaps one day find a way to deny it once more. But that day is not today. Today the hunger reigns. The air in the abandoned Cranbrook Mental Asylum was thick, stagnant, and heavy with the ghosts of forgotten sorrows. Rust gnawed at the metal window frames, and moonlight, fractured by grime-coated glass, painted grotesque patterns on the peeling walls. I, Arthur Finch, amateur urban explorer and seasoned thrill seeker, found myself drawn to places like this, places where the past clung like cobwebs and whispered secrets to anyone foolish enough to listen. I told myself I was there to document the decay, to capture the architectural horrors with my camera. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. There was a morbid fascination, a perverse attraction to the darkness that resided within these crumbling walls. I wanted to touch the madness, to feel the echoes of desperation. The main entrance had long since been sealed, so I'd found my way in through a collapsed section of the rear wall. The stench of mildew, decay, and something indefinably human assaulted my nostrils. Each step sent tremors through the silence, the sound amplified by the cavernous emptiness. Room after room, I found the same grim tableau. Rusted beds, scattered medical records bleached by time, and graffiti that spoke of pain and torment. It was all predictable, almost cliché. I was beginning to think the stories were overblown, that the asylum was just another empty shell, another victim of neglect. Then I reached the sub-basement. The air grew colder down there, laced with a dampness that seeped into my bones. The flickering beam of my flashlight danced across the walls, revealing rows of cells, each a miniature tomb. This was where the truly lost souls had been kept, the ones deemed too dangerous, too damaged, for the world above. And then I heard it, a whisper, faint and fragile, like the flutter of a trapped moth. It seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves, a desperate plea that clawed at my sanity. "Help me!" My heart hammered against my ribs. I froze, my flashlight beam trembling in my hand. Logic screamed at me to turn back, to dismiss it as a trick of the acoustics, a phantom born of my own imagination. But the whisper came again, clearer this time, tinged with a terrible urgency. Please help me. I followed the sound to the end of the corridor, to a cell almost completely obscured by shadow. The steel door was reinforced with heavy chains and a rusted padlock. Hesitantly, I reached out and rattled the lock. It crumbled at my touch, the rusted metal disintegrating like dust. The chains followed suit, snapping with ease. The door creaked open, revealing a figure huddled in the corner. It was a young woman, impossibly pale and thin, her eyes wide and filled with a bottomless despair. Her wrists were bound to the wall with thick leather restraints, chafing at her skin. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a croak. She didn't answer, only looked at me with those haunted eyes, her lips moving silently. Driven by a surge of adrenaline and a misguided sense of heroism, I fumbled with the restraints, finally managing to undo them. As soon as her hands were free, she launched herself at me, burying her face in my chest, her body trembling uncontrollably. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raspy and weak. "Thank you for finding me." I held her, feeling an overwhelming sense of pity and, I confess, a flicker of something else, something not entirely altruistic. I helped her out of the asylum into the cool night air. She told me her name was Eliza, and that she'd been wrongly committed years ago by a cruel and greedy relative. The story was implausible, riddled with holes, but I didn't care. I was caught in the thrill of the rescue, the hero's glow blinding me to the obvious red flags. I took her back to my apartment, gave her food, clean clothes, and a place to sleep. She was grateful, almost unnervingly so. She clung to me, her eyes constantly fixed on my face, as if afraid I would disappear. That was the first night. The second night, she was different. Gone was the frightened, fragile woman. In her place was something sharper. Her eyes burned with an intensity that made me uneasy, and her movements were fluid, almost predatory. She still clung to me, but now it felt possessive, suffocating. And then the whispers started again. Not the faint, desperate pleas from the asylum, but a different kind of whisper. A low, seductive murmur that slithered into my dreams and wrapped itself around my thoughts. "You're mine now, Arthur," it said. "You set me free. You belong to me." I tried to dismiss it as stress, as the lingering effects of my adventure in the asylum. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until I could hear them even when I was awake. A constant, unsettling hum beneath the surface of reality. Then came the thirst, a ravenous, insatiable thirst that no amount of water could quench. I felt weak, drained, as if my life force was being slowly siphoned away. One night, I woke to find Eliza standing over me, her eyes glowing in the darkness. Her face was pale and inhumanly beautiful, her lips stained a horrifying crimson. "I need you, Arthur," she whispered, her voice a silken caress. "I need your life." A cold dread washed over me, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I had made a terrible mistake. I had not rescued a damsel in distress. I had unleashed something ancient and malevolent, something that had been lurking in the shadows of the asylum for decades, waiting for a fool like me to open the door. She leaned closer, her touch sending shivers down my spine. I tried to scream, but my voice was trapped in my throat. I tried to fight her, but my limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. It was as if all the strength had been drained from my body, leaving me a hollow shell. Her lips brushed against my neck, and I felt a sharp, excruciating pain as she pierced my skin. I tasted the metallic tang of blood, my own blood, as she drank deeply, her eyes closed in ecstasy. The world began to fade, the darkness closing in around me. As my consciousness slipped away, I heard her whisper again, her voice filled with a chilling satisfaction. "You're mine now, Arthur, forever." Now every night she comes, a pale ghost in my apartment, her eyes burning with eternal hunger. I am trapped, bound to her by a debt I can never repay. My life is no longer my own. It belongs to her, to the creature I unwittingly freed from the forgotten asylum. And the worst part is, I know I deserve it. I went looking for darkness and I found it. Now I am condemned to live with it, to feed it, until the end of my days. And even then, I suspect my torment will not be over. For I am hers now, and she never lets go. The dust hung in the air, thick and choking, illuminated by the single bare bulb hanging precariously from the rafters. Tasted like decay and regret. We, my wife, Sarah, and I had finally taken the plunge, embarking on the long-promised renovation of our century-old Victorian. The plan was simple. Knock down the walls separating the cramped living room from the ridiculously small dining room, creating a bright, open space. It seemed innocent enough back then. Now, staring at the gaping hole where the wall had been, I knew we had unleashed something far more sinister than just a remodeling project. "Look at this, David." Sarah's voice, usually a melodic alto, was sharp with excitement, almost brittle. She was kneeling amidst the rubble, gingerly holding up a dusty, glass jar. Inside, packed tight like morbid jelly beans, were teeth. Human teeth. My stomach lurched. What the hell? We found more. 5 in total, each buried within the wall's innards. Some held neatly spaced rows of molars. Others were a chaotic jumble of incisors and canines, stained yellow with age. A wave of nausea washed over me. The contractor, a burly man named Frank with a booming laugh and a reassuring demeanor, paled when he saw them. I'm out," he stammered, his voice uncharacteristically thin. "I don't mess with stuff like this. You're on your own." He packed his tools with frantic energy and fled, leaving us standing in the swirling dust, surrounded by the silent, grinning contents of the jars. That was the beginning. The first few nights after Frank's departure were filled with an unsettling silence, broken only by the creaks and groans of the old house settling. But then the scratching started. A faint, rhythmic scraping behind the walls, like tiny claws dragging across aged plaster. It was subtle at first, easily dismissed as rodents, but it grew in intensity, becoming more insistent, more deliberate. It followed me from room to room, a constant, maddening presence. Sleep became a luxury. Every rustle, every creak sent my heart hammering against my ribs. I started leaving the lights on, a pathetic attempt to ward off the encroaching darkness and the unseen horrors it held. Sarah, however, seemed unfazed. While I tossed and turned, plagued by nightmares filled with grinning skulls and leering shadows, she slept soundly, nestled against me like a child. But something about her had changed. Her eyes, once warm and hazel, held a distant, glassy quality. She moved with a strange, almost unsettling grace, her laughter taking on a hollow, echoing tone. Then came the teeth. I woke one morning with a peculiar soreness in my mouth. My tongue probed the gap where my right molar had been. Panic seized me. I stumbled to the bathroom, my reflection staring back at me with hollow-eyed terror. "Sarah!" I roared, my voice hoarse. She appeared in the doorway, her expression serene, almost beatific. In her hand, she held a small, blood-stained cloth. Within it, nestled amongst the crimson fibers, was my tooth. "You were grinding your teeth, darling," she said softly, her voice devoid of emotion. "I thought I'd save it for you." I stared at her, speechless. The casual horror of her words, the unsettling calmness of her demeanor, chilled me to the bone. Over the next few weeks, it continued. One by one, my teeth disappeared during the night, each extraction accompanied by Sarah's unsettling explanation. She collected them, each tooth carefully wrapped in a blood-soaked cloth, and stored them in a small, intricately carved wooden box she had found in the attic. I tried to talk to her, to reason with her, but she would only smile that empty, vacant smile and tell me I was being silly, that she was only taking care of me. My world narrowed, shrinking to the confines of the house, to the constant scratching behind the walls, to the terrifying ritual of Sarah's nocturnal extractions. I felt myself slipping, losing my grip on reality, drowning in a sea of paranoia and fear. One night, driven to the brink of madness, I decided to investigate the scratching. Armed with a crowbar, I crept into the living room, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence. I stood before the wall, the source of the unending torment, and took a deep breath. With a grunt, I plunged the crowbar into the plaster, tearing away chunks of the wall to reveal the dark, hollow space within. The scratching intensified, reaching a fever pitch. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the symphony of dread. I ripped away more plaster, my hands trembling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. And then I saw it. Not rats, not mice, but something far more sinister. Nested within the wall's framework, nestled amongst rotted timber and crumbling plaster, were things. Humanoid in shape, but twisted and deformed. Their skin stretched taut over bone, their eyes black and empty. They moved with jerky, unnatural motions, their long, spindly fingers scraping against the wall. They were made of teeth, hundreds, thousands of teeth, fused together to form grotesque, nightmarish figures. They were the source of the scratching, the source of the terror that had consumed my life. And then I saw Sarah. She stood in the doorway, bathed in the pale moonlight, her eyes glowing with an unholy light. In her hands, she held the wooden box, overflowing with my teeth. "They need more," she whispered, her voice a chilling parody of her own. "They need your teeth to become whole." I understood then. The house, the jars, the scratching, Sarah. It was all connected. The house was alive, a sentient entity feeding on fear and pain, and Sarah was its instrument. She lunged, her fingers reaching for my mouth. I recoiled in horror, scrambling backwards, but she was too fast. She pinned me against the wall, her grip surprisingly strong. The wooden box clattered to the floor, scattering my teeth across the room. I struggled, desperate to break free, but her strength was unnatural, fueled by something unholy. Her face loomed close, her eyes burning into mine. "Don't worry, darling," she whispered, her breath hot and fetid against my face. "This won't hurt much." I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But then, a different kind of scratching filled the air. A louder, more insistent scratching, coming from inside the walls. The creatures within were agitated, restless. Sarah froze, her grip loosening. She turned her head, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. The wall behind me began to crack and crumble. The creatures within were breaking free. They clawed their way through the plaster, their grotesque forms wriggling into the room. They swarmed over Sarah, their toothy bodies clinging to her like grotesque parasites. She screamed, a high-pitched, piercing shriek that echoed through the house. And then silence. I opened my eyes. Sarah was gone, consumed by the creatures made of teeth. They turned towards me, their empty eyes filled with a chilling anticipation. I knew what they wanted. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the darkness. The scratching began anew, closer this time, more intimate. I could feel their cold, bony fingers probing my gums, searching for purchase. The last thing I felt was the excruciating pain as they tore the first tooth from my jaw. The house was hungry, and I was the next course. The news of David's suicide hung in the sterile air of the office like a malevolent perfume. I'd known David for 5 years, shared countless strained smiles across overflowing cubicles. He was quiet, meticulous, a creature of habit. Suicide was discordant. He'd left no note, no explanation for the sudden despair that apparently consumed him. The police ruled it asphyxiation, accidental it seemed, but I knew David. He was too fastidious for accidents of that nature. My gaze drifted to his desk, still untouched, a bizarre memorial to a life abruptly extinguished. On top, amidst the scattered papers and half-empty mug, lay his daily crossword puzzle. David was a crossword fanatic. He tackled the New York Times puzzle with the same quiet determination he applied to everything else. An odd compulsion drew me to it. I felt like I needed to understand, to find some clue, some hint of the darkness that had swallowed him whole. I picked it up, my fingers brushing against the cold newsprint. It was partially completed. A smattering of answers filled the grid, familiar crosswordees sprinkled among them. Then my blood ran cold. 2 clues stood starkly uncompleted, seemingly untouched. One across, your full name, 11. For down. Cause of death. 12. A shiver traced its icy finger down my spine. Felt wrong. Too deliberate. A sick, twisted joke. I felt a morbid curiosity, a relentless urge to fill those blanks, to unravel the final, chilling puzzle he'd left behind. I pulled out a pen, my hand trembling slightly. For one across, I carefully wrote in David Miller, fitting perfectly within the 11 spaces. My heart hammered against my ribs. Then came 4 down, the answer to the question nobody could answer. My breath hitched. Cause of death. 12. As I wrote each letter, my dread intensified. It felt less like solving a crossword and more like conducting a seance. AASPHYXIATION. Asphyxiation. The word swam before my eyes. The same word the police used. The same word that echoed the hollowness of David's vacant desk. It was a horrifying coincidence. A cruel twist of fate. Wasn't it? It had to be. I pushed back from the desk, the chair scraping against the linoleum floor. I needed air. The office felt smaller, the atmosphere thick and oppressive. My chest tightened. I reached into my bag, my fingers fumbling for my inhaler. Panic clawed at my throat. Empty. The inhaler was empty. My mind raced. When had I last used it? Last night? This morning? Couldn't remember. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I tried to take a deep breath, but my lungs refused to cooperate. Air became a precious, elusive commodity. Another wave of panic crashed over me, stronger this time. My eyes darted around the office. Sarah from accounting was engrossed in a spreadsheet, oblivious. Mark from sales was on a call, his voice booming. Nobody noticed my silent struggle. Suddenly, the completed crossword on David's desk seemed to pulsate with a malevolent life of its own. Your full name, cause of death. It was no longer just a puzzle. It was a prophecy. I stumbled towards my own cubicle, desperate to find my spare inhaler. I knew I had one, somewhere. Clawing through the clutter on my desk, papers flew, pens scattered, but no inhaler. My vision began to blur. The room started to spin. My breathing became shallow, rapid gasps. Was this it? Was I next? The unsettling thought burrowed into my brain, fueled by the lack of oxygen and the horrifying implication of the crossword puzzle. David's death, now mine. A terrifying chain of events linked by a twisted game. I remembered a conversation I had with David a few weeks ago. It was a casual exchange, but it now resonated with a chilling clarity. The crossword's been weird lately, he'd said, his normally bland voice tinged with an unsettling note, almost predictive. I'd laughed it off at the time, attributing it to his obsessive dedication to the puzzles. But now, a sudden surge of desperate energy propelled me to my feet. I couldn't succumb to panic. I wouldn't let this crossword, this thing, dictate my fate. My fingers, numb and clumsy, grasped for my phone. I fumbled with the touchscreen, my eyes struggling to focus. Dial 911. Just get the numbers right. Each number seemed to take an eternity. My lungs burned. The phone slipped from my grasp and clattered to the floor. I crawled, desperate, towards the phone. My vision tunneled, the edges of my sight fading into black. As I reached for the phone, my hand landed on something else. Something small, cylindrical, familiar. My spare inhaler. With trembling hands, I brought it to my lips and inhaled deeply. The relief was almost instantaneous. The burning in my lungs subsided. My vision cleared. The spinning stopped. I lay there on the floor, gasping for breath, clutching the inhaler like a lifeline. The office around me slowly came back into focus. As my breathing regulated, the fear began to recede, replaced by a chilling realization. David's words echoed in my mind. Predictive, but could a crossword really predict death? Or was it just a horrifying coincidence, amplified by my own panic and predisposition to believe the impossible? I picked up the phone and called 911, requesting an ambulance. As I waited, I looked back at David's crossword, sitting innocently on his desk. I knew then that I couldn't just dismiss it. I couldn't ignore the chilling feeling that something far more sinister was at play. David's death, the crossword, my near-death experience. They were all connected, woven together by a thread of unnerving synchronicity. I knew I had to investigate to unravel the truth behind the crossword puzzle of death, even if it meant confronting a darkness that threatened to consume me as well. The ambulance sirens wailed in the distance, a stark reminder of my brush with mortality. As I waited for them to arrive, I knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. The puzzle was far from solved, and I was determined to find the answer no matter the cost. The ranger's words echoed in my head, a grim mantra against the crackling campfire. Don't leave your tent after 2 a.m. Nothing good wanders these woods then. We, a group of 5 lifelong friends seeking respite from the suffocating city, had scoffed. Arrogant city dwellers, we thought we knew better than some grizzled old park ranger. Now, 3 days into our camping trip, I understood, and I was terrified. It started subtly, strange rustling outside the tent, deeper and heavier than any squirrel or raccoon. Unsettling silence, the kind that smothers the usual symphony of the forest. We dismissed it as paranoia, the mind playing tricks in the darkness. Then came the night. I woke with a start, a cold sweat clinging to my skin. The digital clock on my phone glared 2:17 a.m. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the tent floor. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drummer in the suffocating silence. My rational brain screamed at me to stay put, to ignore it, to pretend I was asleep. But curiosity, that insidious, irresistible force, clawed at me. And then the zipper. The nylon teeth shrieked as they were pulled apart, a sound that ripped through the night and burrowed into my soul. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped it. I flicked it on, the beam cutting through the inky blackness. And there it was, standing just outside the tent opening, silhouetted against the faint starlight filtering through the trees, was a figure, humanoid in shape, but impossibly tall and gaunt. But it was the head, or what passed for it, that froze the blood in my veins. Lodged atop its shoulders was a deer skull, the empty eye socket staring into nothing, or perhaps staring straight through me. Antlers, gnarled and twisted like ancient branches, scraped against the tent flap. Couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, couldn't even blink. I was trapped, a rabbit caught in the headlights of a monstrous machine. The thing didn't move. It simply stood there, its silence more terrifying than any roar. The beam of my flashlight trembled, painting the scene in a macabre dance of light and shadow. After what felt like an eternity, it finally turned its skull head, the antlers catching the light like polished bone. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, it stepped back into the darkness, swallowed whole by the trees. I lay there, paralyzed with fear, until the first sliver of dawn painted the sky. I didn't tell the others. Shame, disbelief, and the fear of ridicule kept me silent. I convinced myself it was a nightmare, a figment of my sleep-deprived imagination. But the woods felt different that day. Heavy, watchful. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of terror through me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next day, Mark disappeared. We'd been hiking a familiar trail, laughing and joking, trying to recapture the carefree spirit we'd arrived with. Mark had wandered off the path to take a picture of a particularly vibrant patch of wildflowers. We called out to him, but only the echo of our voices answered. We searched for hours, our initial concern escalating into full-blown panic. Finally, we alerted the authorities. The search party found nothing. Not a scrap of clothing, not a footprint, not even a broken twig to indicate where he'd gone. It was as if he'd simply vanished into thin air. The ranger, the same one who'd warned us, looked at me with knowing eyes. "Some folks just ain't meant to leave the city, son," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "The woods, they have their own way of keeping things." I knew then, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the thing with the deer skull had taken him. We cut the trip short. We were a shaken, diminished group, the laughter replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. As we packed, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a glimpse of antlers disappearing behind a tree. I spun around, but there was nothing there. I tried to tell the others what I'd seen, but the words caught in my throat. Fear, a cold, constricting hand, choked the life out of my voice. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. They were already struggling to cope with Mark's disappearance, clinging to rational explanations, clinging to sanity. The thing followed me home. I saw it in the periphery, a fleeting glimpse of a tall, gaunt figure in the shadows. I heard it at night, the soft rustling outside my window, the guttural growl that sent shivers down my spine. I started sleeping with the lights on, barricading my doors, jumping at every sound. Then, Sarah vanished. She was walking home from work, a route she'd taken 1,000 times. Her husband reported her missing when she didn't come home. Again, the police found nothing. No witnesses, no clues, no trace. The pattern was clear. It was hunting us. I tried to warn the others, but they were too scared, too traumatized to listen. They accused me of being hysterical, of letting my imagination run wild. They distanced themselves from me, as if my fear was contagious. Now only Tom and Emily remain. We huddle together in Tom's apartment, barricaded and terrified, waiting for the inevitable. We know it's coming. We can feel it, a malevolent presence that permeates the very air we breathe. Last night, I saw it in the reflection of the window, standing across the street, bathed in the eerie glow of a streetlight. The deer skull was tilted slightly, as if it was studying us, assessing its prey. I could feel its gaze, cold and empty, piercing through the glass and into my soul. Tom is convinced we should go to the police, but I know it's useless. They won't believe us. They'll think we're crazy. And even if they did believe us, what could they do? How do you fight something that defies explanation? Something that exists in the liminal spaces between reality and nightmare? Emily just stares blankly ahead, her eyes wide and vacant. She hasn't spoken in days. I think she's already given up. I'm writing this now, a desperate attempt to leave some kind of record, some kind of explanation before it's too late. I don't know what this thing is, what it wants, or why it's chosen us. All I know is that it's relentless, that it's always watching, and that it will not stop until we're all gone. The rustling is getting louder now. It's just outside the door. Tom is whimpering, clutching a baseball bat like a lifeline. Emily hasn't moved. I can hear the zipper. It's coming for us. I can see the antlers through the peephole. God help us. The first time I saw him, I dismissed it as paranoia. A trick of the light reflecting off a storefront window. A fleeting impression in my peripheral vision. I was walking home from the office, a particularly grueling Tuesday bleeding into dusk. I was tired, stressed, and easily spooked. So, a figure in a yellow raincoat, a splash of vibrant color in the muted cityscape, lingering a little too long behind me. I could explain it away, but then it happened again. The next day, same yellow raincoat, same unervingly consistent distance, roughly 10 feet. I'd glance back, trying to catch a glimpse of a face, but the hood was always up, obscuring everything. He was just there, a silent, unwavering presence. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was going the same way. Coincidence. New York City was full of them. I altered my route, ducking down side streets, cutting through the park. He was still there, always 10 feet behind. He moved with me, effortlessly navigating the shifting urban landscape. My anxiety ratcheted up a notch. I started looking for patterns, anything that would explain his persistence. Was I being targeted? A case of mistaken identity? Did I accidentally cut him off in traffic and unleash his silent wrath? Nothing made sense. The police were less than helpful. A guy in a raincoat? Following you? Sir, this is New York. We have guys dressed as superheroes begging for money. Unless he's making threats or causing you harm, there's not much we can do. I understood their point, but the unease gnawed at me. It was a primal fear, a sense of being hunted, of being watched by something unnatural, because that's what it felt like. No human could maintain that perfect distance, that unwavering focus without breaking stride or making a sound. I started documenting everything. Times, locations, descriptions, as limited as they were. I became obsessed with the details. The way the yellow fabric rippled in the breeze, the dull gleam of the rubber boots, the unnerving stillness of the figure beneath the hood. Then came the days when I tried to confront him. I'd stop abruptly, turn around, and demand, "What do you want? Who are you?" But he just stopped too. A silent yellow statue, 10 feet away. The city sounds would rush in to fill the void of his silence. The blare of horns, the rumble of buses, the distant wail of a siren. He would not speak. He would not approach. He would only wait. I tried losing him. I jumped into cabs, dove into crowded stores, even took the subway in the opposite direction. It never worked. Somehow he always reappeared. The same unnerving distance maintained. Cars, walls, crowds, nothing seemed to deter him. He was relentless. Sleep became a luxury. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced he was standing outside my window, watching me. I started drawing the blinds, locking the doors, triple-checking everything. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage. The fear was consuming me. It was affecting my work, my relationships. My friends told me I was being paranoid, that I needed to relax, to seek therapy. But they hadn't seen him. They hadn't felt the weight of his silent gaze. Then one day everything changed. I was walking to a doctor's appointment, my anxiety already sky-high. I was on a busy street, weaving through the lunchtime crowd, and I saw him. He was there as always, but something was different. He was closer, maybe 8 feet. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but I knew it. The air crackled with a new tension, a heightened sense of dread. He was learning. He was adapting. He was closing the gap. Panicked, I started to run, pushing through the throng of people, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. I cut down a side street, darted into a deli, and sprinted through the back exit, bursting out into a narrow alleyway. I leaned against the brick wall, gasping for breath, trying to calm myself. Maybe I'd finally shaken him. Maybe the chaos of the crowd had thrown him off. Then I heard it, the soft squish of rubber boots on wet pavement. He was there, at the end of the alley, and he was even closer, 5 feet. I could feel the heat radiating from whatever was beneath that yellow raincoat. I could almost smell it, a damp, musty odor, like decaying leaves. He remained silent, motionless, but his presence was overwhelming. I could see the shape of his head beneath the hood, a vague, undefined mass. I could sense the intensity of his gaze, though I couldn't see his eyes. Suddenly, he began to move. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out his hand. It was covered in a yellow glove, the same material as the raincoat. He extended his arm towards me, the distance between us shrinking with each agonizing inch. I was paralyzed, couldn't scream, couldn't run. All I could do was stare, transfixed by the slowly approaching hand. Then, just as his fingers were about to brush against my face, a delivery truck roared past the alley entrance, momentarily blocking him from view. I used the opportunity to escape, bolting down the alleyway and back onto the street. I haven't seen him since, but I know he's still out there. I feel his presence even when he's not visible. The hairs on the back of my neck stand on end whenever I'm walking alone. Every yellow raincoat I see sends a jolt of fear through my system. I know he's learning, he's patient, he's relentless, and one day he'll be close enough. I don't know what he wants. I don't know why he's doing this. All I know is that he's coming, and the space between us is shrinking. I'm writing this as a record, a testament to my sanity. If anything happens to me, I want someone to know. I want someone to understand. The stalker in the yellow raincoat. He's always 10 feet away, or he used to be. I had always been a lover of the unusual and the macabre, so when a mysterious package arrived on my doorstep, I couldn't help but be intrigued. The box was wrapped in plain brown paper, with no return address or postage stamp to indicate where it had come from. I carefully opened it, revealing a necklace made of what appeared to be tiny, shimmering diamonds. A note, written in a delicate hand, read simply, "Wear me." I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do, but something about the necklace called to me, and I found myself slipping it over my head. The diamonds felt cold against my skin, but I soon forgot about the chill as I admired the way they caught the light. It wasn't until later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, that I noticed something strange. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a man standing behind me. He was tall and thin, with a gaunt face and sunken eyes, and he wore a black hoodie that obscured his features. He didn't make a sound, but every time I caught a glimpse of him, I could feel his gaze on me. It was unnerving, to say the least, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something familiar about him. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about the man in the hoodie. I saw him everywhere I went. In the grocery store, at the park, even in my own backyard. No matter where I was, he was always there, watching me from the shadows. I tried to ignore him, but his presence was impossible to deny. As the days passed, the man in the hoodie became more and more insistent. I would catch him following me down the street, his footsteps echoing ominously in the silence. I could feel his breath on the back of my neck, even though he never came close enough to touch me. And every time I looked into his eyes, I saw the same words etched into the depths of his gaze: "You're mine." I became convinced that the necklace was the source of the man's power. Every time I wore it, I could feel him growing stronger, his presence becoming more and more oppressive. I tried to take it off, but no matter how hard I pulled, the clasp wouldn't budge. It was as if the necklace had become a part of me, bound to my very soul. I knew I had to find a way to break the curse, but I had no idea where to start. I spent hours poring over ancient texts and forbidden tomes, searching for any clue that might help me. But the more I read, the more I realized that I was in way over my head. The man in the hoodie was no ordinary stalker. He was a creature of darkness, a being beyond human comprehension. Desperate for answers, I turned to the only person I knew who might be able to help me: a wise old woman who lived on the outskirts of town. She was rumored to be a powerful witch, with the ability to commune with spirits and banish curses. I didn't know if I believed the rumors, but I was willing to try anything at this point. The woman listened patiently as I told her my story, her eyes narrowing in concentration. When I finished, she rose from her chair and walked over to a shelf filled with jars and vials. She rummaged through them for a moment, then pulled out a small, stoppered bottle. "Drink this," she said, handing me the bottle. "It will give you the strength you need to face your stalker." I hesitated for a moment, then unstoppered the bottle and took a cautious sip. The liquid inside was bitter and sharp, like nothing I had ever tasted before. But almost immediately, I felt a surge of power coursing through my veins. I felt stronger, braver, ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. The woman led me to a small, dimly lit room at the back of her house. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror. She told me to stand in front of the mirror and repeat a series of incantations she had taught me. "The mirror will show you your true self," she said. "It will reveal the power that lies within you. And when you are ready, it will help you banish the stalker from your life." I did as she instructed, reciting the incantations with all the strength I could muster. First, nothing happened, but then, slowly, the surface of the mirror began to shimmer and shift. I could see myself, but it was as if I was looking at a stranger. I was no longer just a woman. I was a force to be reckoned with, a being of light and power. And then, suddenly, the man in the hoodie appeared behind me. But this time, he was different. He was no longer a creature of darkness, but a lost soul, trapped in a world that he no longer understood. He reached out to me, his eyes pleading, and I knew what I had to do. I took a deep breath, then raised my hands and uttered the final incantation. A blinding light filled the room, and when it faded, the man in the hoodie was gone. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a burden I hadn't even realized I had been carrying. I thanked the wise old woman, then returned home, ready to start my life anew. I knew that I would never forget the man in the hoodie, but I also knew that I was stronger now, capable of facing whatever challenges lay ahead. And as for the necklace, I decided to keep it as a reminder of the lessons I had learned. It was no longer a curse, but a gift, a symbol of the power that lay within me. I wore it proudly, knowing that I was no longer a victim, but a survivor, a warrior in my own right. But every now and then, when I least expected it, I would catch a glimpse of the man in the hoodie, standing in the shadows, watching me from afar. And every time I saw him, I would smile, knowing that he was no longer a threat, but a guardian, a silent protector who would always be with me, reminding me of the strength that lay within. The streetlights on Don Street had always been temperamental, flickering like dying fireflies even on the clearest nights. But tonight was different. Tonight they were dead. A complete and utter blackout had descended, swallowing the familiar suburban landscape in a suffocating darkness I could practically taste. I lived at the far end of Don Street, a cul-de-sac house with a generous yard that backed onto a thicket of woods. Usually, I found the seclusion comforting. Tonight, it felt like a vulnerability. The silence that followed the sudden power outage was initially eerie, but quickly broken. A dog began to bark incessantly 3 houses down. Then a car alarm blared for a few agonizing minutes before dying a strangled death. Then the screams started. They began as faint, high-pitched wails, carried on the light breeze. They seemed to be coming from the upper end of Don Street, growing steadily louder, closer. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the initial confusion. These weren't playful screams or even cries of surprise. They were raw, guttural expressions of terror, the kind that scraped against your bones and left you shivering. Then came the sound of shattering glass. A window breaking, maybe, or perhaps something larger, a storefront perhaps, further up the street. It was followed by desperate shouts, calls for help that were quickly cut off, leaving only an echoing void. I fumbled for my phone. The screen's light a meager beacon in the absolute darkness. No signal. Of course, I tried the landline. Dead. I was isolated, adrift in a sea of escalating horror. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the suffocating silence between the screams. I crept to the window, peering out into the black abyss. The thick trees behind my house were just a dark, looming presence. The street was invisible, a gaping maw waiting to swallow me whole. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from my front door, followed by frantic knocking. I froze, every muscle tense. Should I answer? Was it a neighbor or something far more sinister? The knocking grew more insistent, desperate. Help me. Please, someone, help me. The voice was familiar, a little girly yet husky from the apparent fear. It was Jane. Jane from across the street. Swallowing hard, I cautiously opened the door, just a crack. Jane stumbled inside, collapsing against me. The smell of iron, thick and metallic, filled the air. Blood. Her hands and arms were smeared with it, her face streaked with a mixture of tears and crimson. "Oh God! Oh God!" she sobbed, her voice barely a whisper. "They're coming. Hide. You have to hide." "What happened, Jane? What's going on?" I managed to choke out, trying to keep my voice steady. She shook her head, her eyes wide with a terror that transcended anything I'd ever seen. I don't know. It all happened so fast. The lights went out and then they came. Not human. I don't know what they are, but they're not human. Who, Jane? Who are they? I pressed, gripping her shoulders. They have this horrible smell, like rotten eggs. Their eyes glow red in the dark. They tear through you like animals. She broke down into violent sobs. They got David. They got Mr. Henderson. Mrs. Peterson is gone. The scream started again, closer this time, accompanied by the sickening sound of something being ripped apart. My blood ran cold. "We need to get out of here," I said, pulling Jane towards the back of the house. "The woods. It's our only chance." We crept through the house, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The darkness pressed in on us, thick and suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards sent shivers down my spine. As we reached the back door, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone pounding on my front door. The wood splintered under the force of the blows. "They're here," Jane whimpered, burying her face in my shoulder. I pushed her towards the back door, fumbling with the lock. "Go! Run!" "But what about you?" she cried. "I'll be right behind you. Go!" I hissed, finally getting the door open. Jane hesitated for a moment, then scrambled out into the darkness. I followed close behind, slamming the door behind me. We plunged into the woods, the rough ground snagging at our feet. Thorns tore at my skin, branches whipped across my face, but I didn't stop, couldn't stop. The sounds of pursuit were getting closer. The heavy thud of footsteps, accompanied by guttural growls that sent icy tendrils of fear snaking through my veins. The air was thick with the stench Jane had described, a nauseating mix of rot and sulfur. We ran blindly through the trees, desperate to put as much distance as possible between ourselves and whatever was hunting us. Jane stumbled and fell, her breath coming in ragged gasps. I helped her up, ignoring the pain in my own legs. "We have to keep going," I urged. "They're still coming." We pressed on, deeper into the woods. The trees grew denser, the darkness more profound. We were completely lost, but at least we were hidden. For now. Suddenly, a pair of red eyes appeared in the darkness ahead, glowing like embers. A low growl rumbled through the trees, and the stench of rot intensified, overwhelming us. Jane screamed and fainted. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. The eyes drew closer, resolving into the grotesque face of a creature that defied description. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its skull. Its teeth were long and pointed, and its eyes burned with an unholy light. It advanced, slowly, deliberately, savoring my fear. I wanted to run, to scream, but I was paralyzed by terror. Then, just as it was about to pounce, a loud crack echoed through the woods. The creature flinched, its eyes darting around in confusion. Another crack, followed by a roar of pain. The creature stumbled back, clutching at its chest. I turned to see a figure emerge from the trees, silhouetted against the faint glow of the moon. It was a man holding a rifle. He didn't say a word, but his eyes met mine, and I knew he was there to help. He fired again, and the creature fell to the ground, writhing in agony. Then, with a final guttural groan, it went still. The man approached us cautiously, his rifle still raised. He crouched beside me, checking Jane's pulse. "She's alive," he said, his voice deep and rough. "We need to get out of here. It's not safe." I nodded, my mind still reeling from what I had just witnessed. "What are they?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The man shook his head. "I don't know, but they're here, and they're not going to stop until everyone is dead." He helped me carry Jane back towards the road, towards the faint glimmer of dawn that was beginning to break on the horizon. As we emerged from the trees, I looked back at Dawn Street. It was silent, still shrouded in darkness. But now, I knew the darkness wasn't empty. It was filled with something evil, something ancient, something that had been unleashed upon our unsuspecting town. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the night of the blackout was just the beginning. The real horror was yet to come. The rain hammered against the windows of Joe's cabin, a relentless rhythm mirroring the unease that had settled over our little group. We were 6 friends: Joe, Peter, Jesse, Willow, Greg, Kate, and myself huddled around a crackling fireplace, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. The storm had knocked out the power hours ago, and boredom, as it often does, had given birth to something far more sinister. It was Joe, ever the instigator, who brought it up. "Anyone ever heard of the game Fear?" he asked, a mischievous glint in his eye. We exchanged confused glances. Peter, ever the pragmatist, scoffed. "Sounds like some cheesy internet creepypasta." "Maybe," Joe conceded, "but it's supposed to be cathartic. You face your fears, right? Simple. Think about the things you fear the most, the things that truly terrify you. Whisper them into an empty glass. Then, light a candle for each fear, as a symbol of facing them. Finally, you say the name of your closest friend. It's supposed to be confronting. Willow, our resident mystic, was intrigued. "And what's the point of saying your friend's name?" Joe shrugged. "No idea. Just part of the game. Some say it's a way of sharing the burden, of knowing you're not alone in your fears." The initial skepticism began to wane, replaced by a morbid curiosity. The storm outside intensified, the wind howling like a tormented spirit, the darkness, the isolation, the thrill of the unknown. It all conspired to draw us in. One by one, we succumbed. First, Greg. He cleared his throat, a visible tremor in his hands as he held an empty glass. He whispered into it, his voice barely audible above the storm. He then lit 2 candles, their small flames casting eerie shadows on his face. Finally, he looked at Kate and said her name. Kate went next, then Jessie, then Willow. The air grew thick with unspoken anxieties, with the weight of our collective fears. The simple act of whispering into a glass felt strangely intimate, a glimpse into the hidden corners of our souls. When it was my turn, I hesitated. I wasn't sure I wanted to participate, but the others were watching, their faces a mixture of apprehension and anticipation. I thought about my deepest fears, the relentless march of time, the crushing weight of loneliness, the fear of losing those I loved. I whispered them into the glass, each word a cold shard of dread. I lit 3 candles, the flames flickering wildly. I looked at Peter, my oldest friend, and said his name. Peter went last. He was visibly uncomfortable, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a nervous twitch. He spoke quickly, his voice rushed and barely intelligible. He lit 1 candle, a pathetic, lonely flame. Then he looked at me and said my name. And that's when things started to go wrong. It began subtly, a cold draft despite the closed windows. The shadows seemed to lengthen and deepen, twisting into grotesque shapes. The sound of scratching at the door, like fingernails dragged across wood. At first, we dismissed it as our imaginations, heightened by the storm and the atmosphere. But then the whispers started, faint, indistinct voices just at the edge of hearing. They seemed to be calling our names. Joe, ever the rational one, tried to quell our rising panic. "It's just the wind," he insisted, though even he sounded unconvinced. "The cabin's old. It plays tricks with sound." But the whispers grew louder, more insistent. And then they started to coalesce into words. Words that mirrored our deepest fears, the very fears we had whispered into the glass. Greg was the first to break. He stumbled to his feet, his eyes wide with terror. "It's here," he stammered. "It knows. It knows what I'm afraid of." He pointed a trembling finger towards the shadows in the corner of the room. "The darkness. It's coming for me." Before anyone could react, the shadows surged forward, engulfing him. He screamed, a strangled, desperate sound that was abruptly cut short. When the shadows receded, Greg was gone, vanished without a trace. Panic erupted. We scrambled back, away from the corner, our hearts pounding in our chests. Joe grabbed a poker from the fireplace and brandished it defensively. "What the hell was that?" he roared, his voice laced with fear. No one had an answer. Then the whispers turned on Kate. They spoke of her crippling fear of failure, of never living up to her potential. She clutched her head, her face contorted in agony. "Stop it!" she screamed. "Leave me alone." A cold hand reached out from the shadows and grasped her arm. She let out a blood-curdling shriek as she was pulled into the darkness, disappearing as Greg had done. We were trapped. The doors and windows were sealed shut, the cabin now a prison. The storm raged outside, a symphony of chaos that echoed the terror within. Joe, Peter, Jessie, Willow, and I huddled together, clinging to each other for warmth and comfort. We tried to reason, to find a logical explanation for what was happening. But there was none. This was something beyond our comprehension, something ancient and malevolent. The whispers continued, relentless and unforgiving. They preyed on our fears, amplified our anxieties, drove us to the brink of madness. It became clear that the game, the innocent game of facing our fears, had opened a door. A door to something unimaginable, something that had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for an invitation. Jessie was next. Her fear was spiders, and she was suddenly covered with them. They crawled all over her face. She tried to scream, but she couldn't, and the spiders consumed her alive. Then Willow, her fear was of death. She had a heart attack. She dropped dead right in front of us. After that, Joe went mad. His biggest fear was losing his mind. He started laughing and hitting his head on the wall until he bashed his skull on the wall and bled to death. That left Peter and I. He had said my name as his closest friend, and I feared losing him. That's when I heard his fear whispering in my ear. I started clawing at my ears to try to ease the madness. I fell to my knees and started to sob. Peter fell to his knees and held on to my legs, asking me to help him, but I was too far gone. I stood up and looked at Peter with a blank expression. I grabbed the poker from the fireplace. "I'm sorry, Peter," I said before impaling him with the poker. "Now I am all alone in this cabin. The storm has passed, and the first rays of dawn are creeping through the windows. The whispers are gone, but the silence is even more deafening. I don't know what happened to us. I don't know why the game of fear turned into a nightmare. All I know is that it came and it took everything, and I am the only one left to bear the burden of our shared terror. I stare at the empty glass, the candles burned down to stubs, and the blood that sticks to my clothes. I know that I can never truly escape the shadows, the whispers, the memories of that horrific night. They will haunt me forever, a constant reminder of the game we played and the price we paid. I am not sure if I will ever be able to live with myself, but will I even live for longer? The same fate might be coming for me in the future. Beware of the game called fear."
Thanks for spending your night with Sinister Slumber TV, where the rain may be soft, but the stories definitely aren't. If you enjoyed the journey through tonight's darkness, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with a fellow night owl. Until next time, sleep tight, and remember, not every noise in the night is just the thunder.